It was the 10th month of the year. Events take us to the outskirts of the Gold Coast in Australia. Patrick Fraser stopped to catch his breath and collect his thoughts. In his arms was a girl, also a victim of circumstances. The main character felt responsible for this fragile creature. The girl looked very weakened, but this is not the main problem. The most important thing is that she was alive. After what she experienced, her strength inexorably left her. The guy prayed for only one thing. If only she could hold on a little longer, help would soon arrive. The girl felt that her time was running out. For her now, the main thing was one thing. Her teleportation skill should not go away with her. She asked Fraser to take this skill for himself before it was too late. The main character felt so helpless. Life was fading away before his eyes, and he could do nothing about it. And he still didn't understand what exactly the girl meant. The girl did not hide anything that she knows who Patrick really is. In a weakened voice, she said something. The main character, looking down, asked her not to continue. He didn't want people to know who he was, but now that this girl was at the end of her rope, it wasn't that important. Gathering her last strength, the girl barely audibly said that she was giving him her teleportation skill so that he could survive in this world. Patrick looked sadly at the life fading away before his eyes. What a pity that the only thing he could do was be with her until the last moment. The main character started screaming. It was a cry of despair and more. Something else was happening to him. His whole body was pounding, as if hundreds of lightning bolts had passed through him. A cry of pain escaped the girl's lips. At that moment, she was giving away something that would no longer be useful to her. Patrick continued to shake. He could not control this process. When it was all over, Fraser sat down next to the body of the unfortunate girl. A radiance rose up from her. This was the last breath of her aura. The main character wanted to scream in pain and despair. Fate has prepared a heavy burden for him. The girl's face was calm and peaceful, as if she had simply fallen asleep. Her last words sounded in my head. I know everything. The guy wondered how he gave himself away. She knew who he really was. She knew this and still trusted him. Yes, he was a carnivorous ability user, capable of absorbing the skills of metahumans. She called him Leader Fraser and asked him to live. In her last moments, this girl thought not about herself, but about who was next to her. Patrick stood next to the girl for some time to pay his respects. He did everything he could. But time does not wait, and the guy moved on. An unclear dark cloud rose up from the girl's body. This clot of energy froze in place for a moment, and then rushed to the heavens. Suddenly a hole appeared in the sky, and luminous spheres began to form above the city. From this hole, many creatures came into our world. The monsters were of different subspecies, one more insidious than the other. As a result of this invasion, millions of people around the world were either injured or killed. The creatures felt like masters, confident in their impunity. Grief has touched everyone on this planet. The survivors lost their families or became refugees. It seemed like there would be no end to this nightmare. Strong countries tried to deal with the situation with the help of military equipment. All forces were thrown into the fight against evil. Everything possible was used. The navy, tanks, and aircraft. The enemy was strong and treacherous. People tried to take every possible chance. The war spared no one. Once beautiful cities turned into ruins, the earth burned under their feet. Unfortunately, people were powerless against the monsters that appeared in their world. Everything was complicated by the fact that in addition to incredible strength, the monsters were endowed with a certain intelligence. Monsters chased people, forcing them to avoid them or hide from them. Humanity was on the verge of extinction. People lived in fear and in constant hunger. The end of the world was already near. So 3 years passed. There was no more faith in the future. At this time, when everyone was already sure that everything was over, there was hope for salvation. Among ordinary people, people with superpowers began to appear. These saviors were later called metahumans. They are the only ones who could resist the monsters. Metahumans were able to destroy special monsters that no one could handle before. The number of these special people grew steadily. The time has come for humanity's counterattack. Metahumans banded together to create a safe zone called the City. Smiles began to return to the faces of the people who had suffered. Hope returned to their lives again. People living in that city could again feel the taste of normal life, as before the arrival of the monsters. But nevertheless, there was still danger, because there remained dangerous zones called deserts. Not all people managed to get into the city. Anarchy and cruelty reigned in these deserts. People continued to live in fear of imminent death. The world is divided into safe and dangerous zones. The following events take place in the Nevada desert. People moved in groups, trying to stay close to each other. Many were already tired and felt exhausted. In the end, one of them could not stand it and turned to the guide with the question of how much longer to go. The guide was wearing a hoodie, half hiding his face. He was a normal person, not a meta. In any case, this is what one of his companions said. The guy asked what the guide's name was. The guide's name was Fraser. The guy moved his hood a little and added, Patrick Fraser. On the way, the travelers saw a desert with a destroyed city. There was no one visible on the streets. One of the guys again turned to the guide to clarify how far away those they were looking for were. Patrick chose not to go into details, but instead offered to look up. There were cocoons at the top. It was not difficult to guess what was inside them, or rather who. Fraser said they were already in copper spider territory. The guide explained that rank 19 copper spiders are relatively easy to hunt. First, you need to cut off all their limbs and head. You only need to take the body. Fraser clarified that, if possible, it is advisable to start with the front 2 legs, since it is with them that spiders attack. There was another important point that the guide mentioned. You need to be extremely careful with the white web coming out of their mouth during the attack. The monsters were dangerous, so you need to be very careful. Just one blow from them could deprive a person of his head. Patrick tried to warn metahumans about the true danger, but such attention slightly hurt the pride of metahumans, who consider themselves super strong and invulnerable. Patrick mentioned that he was aware that it was this team of metahumans that defeated the rank 18 bearded salamander, and therefore the guy apologized for his unnecessary caution, which looked like disrespect. Suddenly, huge, luminous eyes appeared in front of the travelers. Some movement was felt. The monsters sensed prey. The guide quickly got his bearings, ordering everyone to step back. Patrick literally pushed the guy standing behind him and did it in time. The monster's claw pierced right into the place where they were standing. Fraser again shouted to retreat immediately. One of the guys lingered in place, not understanding the danger. The guy didn't seem to realize how dangerous the monster was, or perhaps he was overconfident. The spider hung right over the people. It was too late to leave, and they were forced to take up their fighting positions. One of the guys froze in a daze, confusedly specifying the rank of the monster. It was rank. The monster had fangs and looked creepy. It was ready to attack at any moment. Patrick didn't know what to do. He didn't have superpowers like his companions. The main character tried to reason with the team, but listening to a simple guide was akin to admitting defeat for them. The monster was already very close. Another moment and the irreparable will happen. A second of delay and one of the team members still lost his head. People froze in shock. They waited in horror to see who would be next. Metahumans turned out to be not as omnipotent as they wanted to seem, and most already regretted that they did not listen to the guide, who understood a lot. The main character was the only one who still retained his sanity. He tried to bring the team of these professionals out of their state of stupor, but they did not hear him. Although Patrick already had doubts about the level of skills of the assault squad. But that girl claimed that this squad defeated a level 18 salamander and that if Fraser accompanied them, he would earn a lot of money. It turns out that she lied when she said that these guys were a trained assault squad. Now Patrick was beside himself with anger. He had lost his time, and the Veld could have made some money on someone really worth it. Meanwhile, the copper spider, unlike the assault squad, turned out to be real, and it also attacked for real. The monster was already very close, and the life of the main character was in danger because of his own greed and gullibility. Patrick never expected, when setting out on this campaign, that he would have to defend himself. But at the last moment, the squad leader pulled out his sword and struck the monster, not really hoping for anything. Along with the blow of the sword, some kind of flash appeared. The guy looked at his fist. The glow came from him too. He continued to strike the monster, now not with a sword, but with his fists. Each blow was accompanied by a characteristic glow. Not only the fist glowed, but the whole hand glowed. It wasn't just a glow, it was lightning. The monster's body was ready to explode at any moment. The spider could not withstand such an attack. Patrick noticed that that guy had a special ability. His body produced a huge discharge of electricity, which he skillfully used. At least the main character actually dealt with metahumans. The monster could no longer attack. He could hardly resist. The guys just had to finish him off. The daredevil, who rushed at the monster alone, now waited for support from his comrades. The numbness that gripped everyone at the beginning has now passed, and the members of the detachment rushed to the attack. The blows were delivered one after another. The monster could barely resist. Finally, the spider fell to the ground. The guys did not stop, continuing to strike at the monster's shell. Seeing this, Patrick could not stand it and shouted to cut off the spider's legs first and not hit him on the body. The guys behaved extremely stupidly. Suddenly, the spider opened its eyes again. It seems the monster has regained its strength. Some kind of radiation emanated from the monster's eyes. The guys froze in anticipation, not knowing whether to attack him or dodge. Taking advantage of the general confusion, the monster began to attack again, but this time the blows were accompanied by electric discharges. One of these discharges took the life of a guy standing nearby. The team was again overcome by numbness and confusion. The squad leader again rushed to attack the monster. The monster had already risen from the ground and attacked the guy from above. The spider tried to hit the attacker with its claw. Unfortunately, the monster's blow reached its target. The claw pierced the guy's body right through. The squad leader was lifted up by the monster's paw. The poor fellow could not stand such terrible pain. The guy understood that he was no longer a tenant, but there was no fear in the eyes of the daredevil. There was only disappointment. The wounded fighter tried with all his might to pull the claw out of his body, but it was too late. The monster glowed from the discharges overtaking it, but the power was not enough. The commander gathered his last strength, sending discharges into the monster's body. Finally, the monster threw the body of its victim aside. The body of the unfortunate man fell right next to Fraser. The main character watched this terrible picture with horror. No matter how hard he tries to prevent all this, who would listen to a simple guide? And now the inevitable awaited the guy. The monster is still alive and does not intend to stop. Patrick stood still. There was nowhere to run, and it was too late. As it turned out, the detachment entrusted to the main character consisted entirely of newcomers, too self-confident to listen to the guide who had seen a lot. And now the guide was left alone with the monster. All squad members are dead. There is only one question. How did he manage to get into such a situation? The spider moved closer and closer. All that remained was to fight him or die immediately. But Patrick was only supposed to accompany these people. The following events take us to Area 17 Desert. Life in this small settlement went on as usual, although there was no talk of relaxation. A conversation could be heard from the top floor. A male voice asked Beatrice if she had received another migrant. The man was talking on the phone. The girl's answer was negative, so the man was going to send his man in place. Lucas Fine served as the branch manager of Noda Zone. He felt a certain responsibility and tried not to put off making decisions until later. Jamie, unlike her leader, was more carefree. In addition, as the secretary of the exchange office, she did not have any special tasks. And now, finding herself idle, the young lady simply sat and admired her flawless skin. The idyll was broken by her boss. He called out to the girl, intending to give some instructions. Mr. Fane looked into the reception area and asked Jamie to tell Stephen Aldridge's team of hunters to come to the exchange office. Lucas received a call again, and without going into his office, he began a conversation. The manager was interested in the issue of restoring the barrier, because this issue has often come up recently. And again, it was about Beatrice. It seemed that a lot depended on her. Jamie asked again, thinking that the boss was still addressing her. But the man replied that she should not take the words addressed to him. These were just his thoughts out loud. But since the secretary was a witness to his telephone conversation, the manager decided to clarify how things were going with Fraser. The girl replied that Patrick is currently accompanying a team of copper spider hunters. Lucas was quite surprised because, in his opinion, the matter was trivial and they should have returned long ago. The manager emphasized that Patrick is their most reliable, so there is no need to worry about him. The boss asked the secretary to tell the guy, as soon as he returned, to prepare for a new task, and for the girl, in the end, to stop staring at the mirror all the time. Already entering the office, the branch manager suddenly remembered another question. What did the team that Fraser accompanied provide to confirm their rank? At the same time, in the desert in the lair of the copper spiders, Patrick was still faced with the dilemma of how to get out of the situation, fight or try to escape. The monster was about to attack its last living victim. The detachment that Fraser accompanied turned out to consist entirely of newcomers, and now they were all dead. Only he was left in this terrible situation. The spider looked ominously, waiting for the right moment. The guy felt for the weapon with his hand. He didn't think he'd have to use the gun this time. He was only supposed to accompany the detachment. This thought persistently swirled in his head. He was offended for himself. The monster raised its hind legs and prepared to attack. The sacrifice this time seemed the easiest of all. Patrick took out the barrel and took aim. The guy hesitated, waiting for the right moment. Another moment and a series of shots rang out. The bullets hit the monster's body instead of hitting the head. Fraser was worried and could not aim more accurately. At this moment, the squad leader heard a faint laugh. He was still alive, although he could not move. The guy grinned that bullets were powerless against such a monster. Patrick was not interested in the commander's comment. He rudely interrupted the wounded man and continued shooting at the spider. The shot still had an effect. The bullets pierced the monster's armor. The bullets hitting the monster's body were accompanied by a series of explosions. The monster was seriously wounded and could no longer attack. These were special bullets equipped with additional cores. This fact outraged the dying commander. If Fraser had such a weapon, why didn't he use it from the very beginning? Then the whole team would be alive. The wounded man's claims angered the guide even more, because if the guys had not lied about their rank, then such a situation would not have arisen at all. The commander did not find what to answer. Patrick's claims were justified. Fraser continued to express his dissatisfaction that because of such garbage as the detachment entrusted to him turned out to be, he now has to lose precious cores. The spider lay seriously wounded and no longer posed much of a danger. Patrick continued to demonstrate his survival skills to the fake metahuman. Patrick took out a dagger and stated that even an ordinary person with the proper equipment and experience can defeat the 19th rank. The guide walked towards the monster without a shadow of fear. Fraser felt it necessary to boast that he had to be a guide alone on 100 forays. The guy accompanied his words with a series of blows to the body of the wounded spider. The exhausted monster let out a terrible cry. Patrick's movements were confident and precise. It was clear that this was not the first time he had to do this. The monster's wounds bled and emitted a terrible smell. Green blood caused even more disgust. Fraser, overcoming a feeling of disgust, continued to finish off the monster. The guy struck in the right places, deftly dodging the monster, who was still trying to survive. Turning to the wounded man, the guide again reminded him that the paws had to be cut off first. Patrick stopped for a moment, looking at the spider, of which now only one head and body remained. Swinging for the decisive blow, the guide added that the spider's head was cut off last. The guy noisily lowered the sword into the right place, and the monster's head gave in, spraying a green, foul substance all around. Fraser skillfully brought his work to the end. The monster's head was almost cut off. The wounded commander silently watched this process, in his last moments regretting that he had not been trained in this earlier. There was fear in the guy's eyes. Patrick finished separating the head from the body of the spider. All his movements were cool and confident. When it was all over, Fraser finally relaxed, reproaching the lying wounded man for trembling before a monster that could hardly be called large. Turning his head towards the wounded man, Patrick added that he remained a typical rookie until the very end, which meant that the rank he indicated in the exchange office was not in fact real. Fraser had already guessed what the so-called evidence of the professionalism of the defeated squad actually consisted of. A rank 18 salamander sheds its skin once a year. This shed skin was picked up by the commander of the fake detachment, presenting it as proof of his victory. There was only one question: why? The commander remained silent. He didn't have any arguments to object to. And yet, despite all the accusations, Patrick admitted that the team actually turned out to be quite brave, as for deceivers. And most importantly, the guys adhered to their code of honor. None of them ran away when others were dying. Patrick expressed his admiration to the commander himself. The main character was amazed that even being seriously wounded in the stomach, the guy grabbed the spider by the front paw and struck back. The next moment, Fraser's admiration gave way to contempt. He put his foot on the chest of the dying commander and said that instead of forging documents about rank, it was worth spending this time on training skills. Fraser understood that the deceiver had his own reasons for such an act. But this no longer concerned the guide. He asked the deceiver a question of a different kind. Did he know what price he had to pay for deceiving Nod? The commander grinned. Without a doubt, he understood that he had committed a criminal offense. Fraser admitted that he would gladly decapitate the deceiver right here and now. But he had no right to do this. At the same time, an inner voice urged the main character to kill the wounded man and take his strength and skill for himself. Patrick gathered all his will into a fist. He could not afford to finish off a person in cold blood for his own benefit. The commander seemed to read his thoughts. He said that he was still dying, and in any case he was no longer destined to face reprisals at the hands of Nod. Fraser pointed his blade at the dying man, gesturing for silence. But what was that voice in my head? It seemed to want Patrick to kill a defenseless man. Patrick convinced himself that he simply heard a voice. The main character sat down, closing his eyes tiredly. Today was a hard day. Suddenly, a treacherous voice sounded in his head, convincing him that this squad had defeated a rank 18 salamander, and if Patrick accompanied them, he would earn a lot of money. Yes, the voice belonged to Jamie. The guy wasn't going to leave it like that. The main character, having returned to the city, first of all went to the office of the Nod exchange office. He needed Jamie. Bursting into the reception room, Patrick demanded an explanation. How Jamie dared to put his life in danger by sending him on a mission with a mediocre squad. The girl tried to justify herself, begging the main character to calm down. Fraser was making fun of him, but really, why should he get excited? He was just risking his life. But the girl allegedly knew nothing. Patrick continued to demand an explanation. But Jamie only smiled confusedly in response, muttering something incoherent. The guy asked a logical question. Is the branch manager really not able to distinguish the shed skin from the cut one? Jamie made excuses that she was also deceived, and in general, those guys deceived everyone. Tired of listening to all this incoherent nonsense, Fraser said that this time he was not going to pay the secretary. And from now on, she will have to provide him with all the information about the clients he must accompany. Jamie tried to argue that what Patrick was demanding was against Nod's rules. Fraser did not listen to her. He stood his ground. Now let the secretary look for ways to get around these restrictions. The girl asked to forgive her for her inattention, promising that this would not happen again in the future. Patrick was exhausted and angry. He only stated that if it were not for the branch manager, he would have long ago severed all ties with Zone. The girl shouted after him that metahumans react very sharply to the fact that guides walk through their territory, and Patrick's demands cannot play a decisive role. Fraser became even more angry. He was annoyed that all the attention was directed towards metahumans. If you are destined to die, then what difference does it make, at the hands of a monster or a hunter? The last task and the moment how those people behaved again surfaced in the main character's memory. Patrick was very upset that he did not have the abilities that the liars entrusted to him possessed. He would definitely have found a more effective use for himself. Resentment and envy did not give the main character peace. At that moment, some strange noise and a bright glow were heard in the reception room. Frightened, Jamie huddled in a corner, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed Fraser's throat, lifting him off the floor several inches. The guy lifted the main character with such ease, as if he were a ragdoll. The guest introduced himself as a metahuman who came after his, Patrick's, soul. The metahuman asked whether he should kill such a guide or not. Fraser could not speak. The guy held him tightly, not allowing him to come to his senses. The guest looked straight into Patrick's eyes, noticing that he had a rather impudent look. The showdown was interrupted by a female voice, claiming that everyone associated with Nod is a representative of the guild, and can use its name if necessary. The girl stood calmly a little behind, continuing to explain that any actions aimed at harming a member of Nod would be interpreted as an attack on Nod itself. The girl asked if this impudent guest had forgotten the rules. The girl's name was Annabelle Dean. She was also a metahuman with enhanced vision of the 17th rank. After the end of the world, Nod was the only guild that continued to fight to maintain peace in the lands called deserts. Nod's mission was to create safe places for humanity to survive, as well as hunt demonic beasts. The guest continued to keep Patrick in limbo, not paying attention to the words of Annabelle, who, nevertheless, asked whether the impudent man was sure of his impunity. After all, he, being a metahuman, allowed himself to attack an ordinary guy. The metahuman who attacked Patrick had enhanced physical abilities of rank. It was Hunter Ryan Bradbury. Common sense prevailed and Ryan released his grip, dropping Patrick to the floor. Fraser tried to catch his breath. The attacker's hand was quite strong. Annabelle approached Patrick and asked if he was okay. Fraser reassured the girl that he was fine. Ryan didn't even think about apologizing. He simply turned his back and stood to the side as if nothing had happened. Miss Dean didn't understand what the point was in acting this way and putting on a show. Behind the guys, a male voice was heard, sarcastically asking whether the young people had finished their conversation. The person who approached was a hunter and leader of the hunting team of Zone 17, Marlin Squad. The guy's name was Colin Crichton. He invited all three to proceed to the branch manager's office. Patrick immediately had questions. Leader Colin Crichton is here for a reason. Plus, all of Marlene's team members were here. Has something really happened? Already in the office, Lucas explained to everyone that he had received a request from Marigold to protect the barrier. Patrick knew Marigold a little, and he guessed that she had apparently passed out again. Crichton confirmed the protagonist's guesses. Colin explained that until Marigold recovered, he would have to play the role of bait. Ryan admitted that he had not yet taken part in this, although he had heard many stories about such requests recently. Crichton said that Marigold is literally exhausting herself, and, if rumors are to be believed, lately she hasn't even been able to sleep. The branch manager was silent, thinking about the situation. Bradbury, as one would expect, said, "Let them defend their lands there on their own and not look for slaves." Lucas did not agree with this, explaining that those people are already in despair. This can be judged by current conditions. Ryan asked what kind of conditions we were talking about, and then Mr. Fain said that they were promising citizenship in the city as a reward for completing the mission. Bradbury thought, citizenship is good. Crichton now had no doubt about how desperate the situation was for those people, if they were already offering such difficult-to-obtain citizenship as a reward. Fraser was the first to decide. He goes there. Colin promised that they would try better this time. Annabelle also agreed, explaining her decision by saying that she had always wanted to visit the famous city. Bradbury was sincerely surprised. Was the desire to visit the city really worth the risk? Being the last one who has not yet given an answer, Ryan also decides to go, motivating his action with a simple desire to obtain citizenship. After making sure that Marlene's team is formed for the special mission, Crichton agrees to meet the next day at 6 at the southwest gate. Fraser confirmed that he would come. It was already late at night, but the main character had no time to sleep. He needed to take some notes. The guy quickly jotted down basic information about the city of Henderson into a notebook. It was one of the largest reconstructed cities after the end of the world. A huge energy barrier was created on the city's borders, stopping all demonic beasts from invading the city's territory. For the past several decades, this energy barrier has been maintained by the forces of a high-ranking hunter named Beatrice. Recently, Beatrice began to have health problems, and this inevitably affected the barrier itself. The girl needed to fully restore her health before she could again perform the task assigned to her. If at this time the barrier was overcome by an S-rank beast, then even if all the townspeople were metahumans, it would still promise an instant loss. After experiencing several tragedies, the city decided to change its strategy. They shamelessly decided to ask for help from the people of the desert, whom they actually despised. All this was done to save their own population. When the team got together, Crichton first checked with Fraser whether the direction would be chosen. The same as last time, or a different one. The main character immediately warned that it was better not to use the previous direction, since the environment had changed. Patrick said that, according to rumors, a bearded gargoyle appeared in this area. It was a rank 5 beast. Hearing this news, Crichton admitted that even for him it would be difficult to defeat such a beast. Fraser came into his own, and considering that the team of these metahumans did not exceed rank 10, he decided to choose a path that would avoid all demonic beasts above rank. Patrick unfolded the map and showed the route. The guy suggested making a detour through the most convenient place, despite the fact that there was still a chance of encountering rank 15 demonic stag beetles. Crichton was not afraid of this. He claimed that he could certainly cope with such creatures. Therefore, the planned path was finally approved. The team slowly set off. Suddenly, Fraser felt something. The guy raised his hand, asking everyone to stop. Ryan, accustomed to going ahead, displeasedly asked what happened, but the guide motioned for silence. Fraser pointed to a strange footprint in the sand. Annabelle also noticed that the trail was uncharacteristic of any particular type of animal. Patrick wasn't 100% sure. The guide needed to check something, and he asked their companion to look around using her enhanced vision. The girl readily agreed. The only question was where exactly to look. Patrick pointed in the direction of the strongest sand clouds. Miss Dean strained her vision, peering in the direction indicated by the guide. The girl looked even further than the sand clouds, but did not notice anything special. Ryan couldn't wait to know what the problem was. He believed that all this was worthless nonsense. Fraser was sure that there was a horde of hobgoblins somewhere nearby. The whole team froze, waiting for what their guide would say. Patrick determined that the hobgoblins passed through here about 15 minutes ago. The main character drew conclusions from his own observations. These monsters had a developed sense of smell, and although their horde was moving in a different direction, Patrick was sure that the animals had already sensed the people and changed their direction. Annabelle looked closer again and said that Fraser was telling the truth. The monsters were coming to them. Crichton once again confirmed that he chose Fraser as a guide for a reason. He could be trusted. Patrick advised limiting the path of these monsters due to the fact that half of their group is not suitable for close combat. Colin asked if there was anything nearby that they could use. Fraser suggested that there was a bridge to the north of them. Now Patrick turned to the hunter Bradbury. They all needed his help. The request was unexpected. Fraser asked Ryan to carry Miss Dean in his arms. The point was that the group would have to run all the way to the bridge. Patrick quickly moved forward. The group ran after him. Ryan was outraged by one thing. Since when did the guide begin to command them? Annabelle spoke out in Fraser's defense, pointing out that this guy is cool enough to give orders, and in addition the girl told Ryan to run faster. Bradbury did not continue to be indignant and listened to the girl. As they approached the bridge, the guys noticed many silhouettes behind them. It seems they have already been overtaken. A group of people still had to face a hobgoblin. The monsters were small but looked very aggressive. The group quickened their pace even more. Fighting monsters was not part of their plans. Patrick looked around from time to time, checking if the monsters were overtaking them. The animals were almost there. These goblins were rank 18, and fighting them was highly undesirable. In fact, one hobgoblin was weaker than a rank 19 copper spider, but these animals had a strong sense of solidarity, thanks to which they united in groups in case of danger. It is for this reason that the hobgoblin horde is ranked rank. Due to this, even metahumans will have a hard time fighting these monsters in an open area. Assessing the current composition of the team, Patrick concluded that for every 2 rank 17 hunters, there is only 1 with close combat skills. The group leader was rank. It was risky, but not that bad. Fraser, after making a quick calculation, determined that the width of the bridge in front of them was 4 meters, and its length was approximately 6-7 meters. It will be great if the team leader and Hunter Bradbury successfully repel the attack in the middle of the bridge. In theory, this would give the team an easy victory. The only problem was the amount of variables. The guys tried to reach the middle of the bridge as quickly as possible. Having reached the middle of the bridge, the group stopped, waiting for the monsters. Patrick turned to Crichton and Bradbury. The 2 of them will have to repel the attacks of monsters in the center of this bridge. Both guys agreed, and the guide at the same time promised to provide support from the rear. Only Miss Dean remained out of work. The girl asked what was required of her at the same time. The first variable that Patrick thought about a little earlier was Annabelle. During battles, she was always ballast in need of protection, and this would distract combat units from the battle. In order to stop being a hindrance, it is better for her not to interfere in the battle in any way. Fraser therefore asked Miss Dean to stand behind him. Ryan and Colin took out their weapons and prepared to attack the monsters. The second variable that the main character identified was that rank was essentially just a number. The first example for Fraser was that team leader Colin Crichton was known outside of Zone 17. But even having worked with him more than once, Patrick would see him in action for the first time. Until this day, the main character did not see what Crichton was really capable of. In addition, hunters Ryan Bradbury and Annabelle Dean had only recently joined the team, and their support skills were unknown to Fraser. The main character could not afford to relax while these variables existed. The hobgoblins were already very close. In his hands, Crichton had an axe with double-sided blades, which he wielded flawlessly. A horde of small monsters was already 2 steps away from Colin, ready to attack at any moment. Another second and the goblins tried to attack, but their attack was successfully repulsed. Small creatures scattered around like 9-pins. The team leader's eyes caught every movement of the enemy, predetermining every attempt to attack. Crichton jumped up, letting out a battle cry. One swing of the axe and the heads of the opponents were cut off from the body, scattering to the sides. Ryan turned out to be a strong warrior. During the entire attack, the monsters did not inflict a single scratch on him. Bradbury only stopped for a second to catch his breath, and at the same time let more monsters approach him. The hobgoblins were defeated one after another, and Ryan didn't even really strain himself. Some monsters fell, others took their place. Ryan confidently eliminated them, feeling neither fear nor fatigue. Patrick didn't even have to intervene in the fight. It turns out that he was worrying about the second variable in vain. Colin and Ryan together successfully repelled the attack of the hobgoblins, not allowing them to move a meter forward. Mass murder is an incredible sight. At least that's what the main character thought. While Patrick and Annabelle were watching the battle, one of the small monsters still managed to slip across the bridge a little further, and was now quietly creeping up on the girl from behind. When the guide noticed, it was already too late. The goblin grabbed the girl by the hair. Bradbury looked back when he heard a scream. He wanted to know what happened there, but Patrick ordered him to look ahead. Ryan was already starting to get annoyed that Fraser was constantly giving orders. The monster raised his axe over the frightened Annabelle, about to strike. At the last moment, the guide grabbed the girl, dodging the blow. Miss Dean should not have been harmed. The monster's axe almost hit the girl. Only a strand of her hair was damaged. Patrick fell sharply onto the pavement, trying to cover the girl with himself. The main character understood that in this situation he could not count on outside help, and he would have to fight the monster himself. The goblin again attempted to attack. With an angry look, he ran towards 2 defenseless people. Fraser stood opposite, blocking the monster's path, trying to protect Annabelle at all costs. The guy hit the monster, but he remained on his feet. The blow was not strong enough. Patrick's failed attempt angered the goblin even more. The monster raised his axe, intending to kill his opponent. Not having sufficient strength and experience, Fraser only rolled to the side, avoiding the blow. The goblin accompanied each of his attempts to attack with a loud cry, hoping to intimidate his opponent. The monster quickly covered the distance separating him from the enemy, and intended to strike again. But at the last moment, a blow to the back with a dagger stopped the goblin. The targeted blow was delivered not by Patrick, but by the girl. Fraser was surprised by Annabelle's sudden determination, and the courage that arose from nowhere. The main character lay on the ground, just watching as a weak-looking girl dealt with the monster. The goblin screamed in pain, but could not do anything. Having caught the right moment, Patrick jumped up and sharply swung his sword, cutting off the monster's head. When Ryan and Colin ran up, everything was already over. The goblin lay dead, and Patrick and Annabelle were just sitting on the ground, trying to come to their senses. Fraser was terribly ashamed that he had failed to adequately protect Miss Dean, but he had promised. The main character looked in confusion at his hands, which had the green blood of the monster on them. He didn't know how to look into the eyes of the girl and the rest of the team. Ryan, as one would expect, immediately reproached Patrick for not fulfilling his responsibility, because he was entrusted with the life of Miss Dean. But the girl again defended the guide, accusing Ryan of missing the goblin by allowing him to sneak in from the other side. Bradbury tried to justify himself. He himself did not expect that the monster would go around on the other side. Now Ryan felt guilty. Seeing the general confusion, Crichton decided to intervene. He was of the opinion that Patrick did the right thing by telling Ryan to focus on the battle. It would have been difficult for Colin to hold the line alone. The team leader turned to Fraser, wondering if he was okay. The main character replied that everything was fine. But his conscience persistently gnawed at him, because he not only failed to protect Miss Dean entrusted to him, but also forced her to help him. Be that as it may, Crichton expressed the general opinion that there was no point in lingering in this place. Moreover, there might be other demonic beasts nearby, but Patrick hastened to reassure everyone. There are only low-ranking monsters here, so there is no one stronger than the hobgoblins here, and the hunters can now relax. The team moved forward, leaving behind a bunch of defeated monsters. The heroes walked slowly through the desert, trying not to pay attention to the light sandstorm. Some objects loomed ahead and the main character and the team stopped for a couple of seconds to get their bearings. Bradbury, being impatient by nature, immediately asked whether they had arrived at their destination. The main character suddenly rushed forward, leaving the team a little behind. Ryan was frankly annoyed by this overly self-confident guide, and yet he only asked a question. Patrick climbed onto a high stone ledge, which apparently served as a barrier against monsters. Looking around, the main character invited the team to follow his example. Ryan noticed that the guide was blatantly ignoring his questions. Having climbed the stone fence, Bradbury repeated the question. Why did they take so long? Miss Dean has already guessed where they are. She peered anxiously at the outlines ahead. Bradbury had never been to this place, and now looked with open surprise at the outlines ahead. The guide, looking back at the team, finally said that they were almost there. In front of them was Henderson's dome. The travelers approached the energy barrier, deciding what to do next. Miss Dean's gaze expressed obvious delight. She did not even imagine that it would look like this. The girl raised her hand to the energy barrier, trying to determine what it was. Suddenly, someone's hand grabbed her wrist, sharply moving her hand inside the energy cocoon. Annabelle screamed in surprise. Ryan stood next to her, grinning. He knew that the girl would be scared, and now he just stood there and smiled brazenly, looking at her reaction. Miss Dean did not appreciate the joke, and spoke sharply to the guy, because she could have had a heart attack. The leader drew the girl's attention to the fact that the energy barrier does not give any physical sensations. Miss Dean herself noticed such an oddity. Ryan decided to verify what was said with his own hands. He walked up to the barrier and plunged his palms into it. Convinced of the absence of any physical effects, Bradbury now doubted the feasibility of the dome and its ability to restrain demonic beasts. But the leader insisted that this barrier had protected the city for decades, so it could be trusted. The guide, interrupting the discussion, invited everyone to go inside. The hunters entered the city and stopped to look around. At the entrance, the guests were met by a law enforcement officer. The man asked the travelers to stop and present identification documents. Colin Crichton introduced himself first, holding up his document in front of the guard. According to the rules, the security guard scanned the document. Each of the hunters was supposed to wear a special bracelet. The bracelet had a chip built into it that looked like a sky-colored crystal. Miss Dean liked the bracelet. She thought it was a cute decoration. The security guard said that the next morning, the barrier would be disabled. Hunters will be provided with temporary accommodation in a community facility where they can train. There was a rule in the city that all guests were forbidden to leave their rooms after sunset because the townspeople were concerned about the desert inhabitants being near them. The hunters were surprised by the above point. Was it really necessary to be wary of people like themselves at such a time? Bradbury, being a rebel by nature, immediately asked what would happen if the guests disobeyed the order not to leave the room after sunset. The guard's answer was unexpected. He said that, in this case, the one who breaks the rule will lose his hand. An explosive device was built into the bracelet, which would also go off if someone tried to remove it by force. So, the risk wasn't worth it. All team members were shocked by this news, and Ryan also joked that a bomb on the wrist was a funny solution. The guard, not paying attention to such jokes, invited the travelers to come inside. According to the main character, such a precaution looked stupid, because in order to prevent animals from entering the city, one barrier would be enough. Patrick guessed that such protective measures symbolized only one thing: the refusal of the city leadership to accept desert people. Miss Dean tried not to pay attention to such trifles, but what appeared before her eyes caused an exclamation of delight. The girl did not hide her surprise at the picture that appeared before them. Colin, unlike the rest of the team, did not show any enthusiasm. Turning to the hunters, he clarified that they were most likely here for the first time. What surprised the hunters so much turned out to be a high-rise building with mirrored windows. The city looked like a real metropolis. There were cafes in the city, and places for recreation were equipped. Annabelle was delighted that, having walked only a few meters, it was as if they were in a completely different world. Colin agreed because he also experienced the same delight when he first came here. Looking at Patrick, who had been silent all this time, Crichton asked if he would go to his apartment right away. The main character admitted that he intends to slightly familiarize himself with the city in order to look for something useful. Patrick left his traveling companions, agreeing to meet later. Ryan made fun of him again so that he wouldn't think of returning without his hand. Walking around the city, the main character was surprised at how peaceful it was, as if nothing terrible had happened. Patrick caught the eye of a sign on the house antique store. Out of curiosity, Fraser decided to go inside, and at the entrance, he immediately came across a girl with a pile of boxes. The girl did not pay attention to Patrick, going about her business. When she passed by, some piece of paper with a photo, reminiscent of a business card, flew out of one of the boxes. Fraser picked up a business card, which turned out to have a photo of the same girl. Patrick immediately turned to the girl, intending to return the dropped item, but the young lady was already far away. After walking around the store, the main character picked himself a box of swimming goggles. The owner was surprised by such a number of points, asking why there was such a number. He also clarified that payment can be made in kernels, because they do not accept scrap metal. The main character did not go into details, asking only how much the goods would cost him. At the same moment, a strange object with a ring attached to it caught Patrick's eye. The guy asked the seller what this item was. The seller replied that it was a magic bomb. If you pull the pin, it will explode like a flashbang. Fraser was surprised that it is allowed to sell weapons to townspeople here. The owner explained that this item is not lethal. Therefore, it is not considered a weapon. But nevertheless, if it explodes nearby, it will blind a person for some time. Patrick was interested in a completely logical question: where this grenade could be used, to which the seller replied that the decision depends on who is using this thing. Such grenades are produced because there is demand. At that moment, the same girl whom Fraser had encountered at the entrance appeared screaming on the threshold of the store. The girl wondered if the owner had seen her entrance card. The young lady looked very frightened, and there was desperation in her voice. The owner replied that he had not found her item. Patrick took the piece of paper the girl had dropped from his pocket, and, showing it to the girl, asked if this was what we were talking about. The girl was very happy that the card was found. The main character said that the card was lying next to the door. After thanking Fraser, the girl decided to introduce herself. Her name was Marie. She worked in the research and development department. Having determined from his clothes that the guy was from the desert, Marie assumed that he was a metahuman. The girl said that such people can get individual help from them. Patrick immediately admitted that he was not a metahuman. Marie was surprised how this was possible. The girl brought her hands to Fraser's wrist, trying to determine his type. She immediately determined that he was neither a strong type nor a visual type. She also ruled out the hearing type. Patrick didn't like being examined like that. The guy sharply pulled his hand back, trying to curb this lady's curiosity. Marie apologized for her excessive interest. The main character once again said that he is not a metahuman. All this seemed strange to the girl. She definitely felt that the guy in front of her was far from simple. Some kind of signal was emanating from him. Her confidence to the contrary made Fraser think. Marie, meanwhile, continued that she also did not determine Patrick's superpowers. But still, something was wrong with him. Be that as it may, the girl was in a hurry to run errands. She once again asked for forgiveness, getting ready to leave. At that moment the phone rang and the girl answered, calling her interlocutor the leader. The main character looked closely at his hand, trying to feel something on his own. The main character nevertheless decided to purchase a flash noise grenade. Already lying in his room, Fraser again remembered Marie's words. What if he really became a metahuman? More than anything, he wanted to become a metahuman. He looked for signs of awakening and methods to become a metahuman, but he just couldn't do it. Eventually, he abandoned this idea and decided to devote himself to work as a guide. And now, when he has almost given up, it turns out that he has finally become what he dreamed of. Patrick closed his eyes, trying to sleep, but his thoughts did not give him peace. The researcher knocked him out of his usual rut. In the end, the guy tried to discard all his reasoning. He needed to rest, because he had serious work to do tomorrow. The next morning, many people gathered on the outskirts. Almost all of them had weapons. There were 10 seconds left before the barrier was deactivated. The countdown has started. People were in full readiness, not fully knowing what might come next. Patrick was also in place. He focused his attention on what was ahead. An operation to defend the city was announced. When the barrier was disabled, people rushed forward. People encouraged each other to move forward. There was something ahead. Fear was already reflected on the faces of some warriors. Chaos arose around. People were taken aback by surprise. Hordes of flying monsters were the first to rush to the city's borders. They were everywhere, attacking people. There were already the first victims. Crichton commanded to look carefully and run forward. Patrick looked back at the leader, clarifying which direction to move. The Marlin squad ran forward, leaving the battle behind. Some mercenaries' nerves could not stand it. One of the guys gave up, begging the guards to let him back into the city. He no longer wanted citizenship. The main thing was to save his life. The guards blocked the deserter's path, not letting him inside. The guy could no longer understand anything. In hysterics, he demanded to be let in. While the first deserter was kneeling in the hope that they would still let him through, the second one tried to run up, but a powerful blow from the monster overtook him, depriving the unfortunate man of his head. Annabelle looked back in horror. The girl was very scared. Trying her best to keep up with her team, Miss Dean asked the leader if he saw what was going on behind there. But Crichton responded by saying that there was no need to look back. In the face of real danger, the main character finally realized something. They were called here, not because there were weak hunters in the city, but to use them as bait. There were many such baits. Flying monsters tore them apart. The city needed bait to distract the monsters while the barrier was shut down. Trying to move forward as quickly as possible, Annabelle saw with her special vision a herd of animals in the northwest. Fraser suddenly felt something too. The guide ordered everyone to stop. When the team stopped, Annabelle said that according to her premonition, there was most likely a horde of rank 9 raptors ahead. Ryan had never encountered this before, and therefore asked the leader how to fight these monsters. Patrick explained that one raptor is rated as 9th rank, and even alone such a monster cannot leave a living place from a horde of hobgoblins. There was no point in the team fighting them. Miss Dean almost burst into tears. She couldn't imagine what they should do now. At this moment, Patrick took out the glasses he had bought the day before and offered them to the team. The main character put on a mask and went into the pond, demonstrating how they need to hide. The method proposed by the guide was unpleasant, but the team had no choice. All 4 sank into the water, leaving only tubes above the surface. Having plunged into the water, Patrick, without the slightest remorse, decided that let the trained townspeople deal with the monsters, and the mercenaries had nothing to suffer. At this time, the monsters had already achieved their goal, destroying the unfortunate people one by one. The Marlin squad was underwater, waiting for its safe hour. Finally, Fraser surfaced to check the situation. The main character took off his glasses and looked around. What appeared before his eyes plunged him into a state of horror. Everything around was littered with the bodies of the unfortunate mercenaries. The monsters had no one else to kill and left the place. Patrick looked back at the lake, allowing the rest of the team to get out. The first thing Ryan did was ask if they passed. Fraser, deciding that we were talking about hunters who encountered a crowd of raptors, confidently assumed that they were most likely already dead. The guide suggested following the tracks of the raptors, justifying this by the fact that raptors are very aggressive, and therefore there will definitely be no other animals on their way. Following through the field of a recent battle, Fraser suggested searching for shelter. The sun was setting, and the travelers had to enter the first building they came across on their way. Ryan sat staring at one point. The day had turned out to be difficult, and now he was worried about only one question. When will it all end? The leader remembered that last time it took several hours. Most likely this time it will last no less. In any case, the team will have to wait for the signal. Fraser listened intently to the silence. Noticing that the guide was listening to something, Bradbury asked what it was, but there was no answer. Miss Dean intensely peered into the faces of the team members, ready to press the signal at any moment. Bradbury instinctively reached for his sword, ready at any moment to repel the attack of the intruder. The leader, unable to stand the weight, asked the guide if he saw something. Patrick replied that he didn't see anything, But something was suspicious. Something was felt outside the window. There was clearly someone in the darkness. Colin tried to calm everyone down. Everything was more or less calm. But Patrick still asked not to rush to conclusions. The whole team was already ready. Ryan and Colin drew their weapons. Finally, Fraser said in alarm that he was seeing something. Crichton peered into the darkness outside the window, afraid to miss the moment. In the darkness, the glowing eyes of a monster appeared right in front of the window. Crichton sharply commanded Fraser and Miss Dean to step back. At the very bottom, something appeared before Ryan's eyes. It was a paw with claws, something like a bird or a reptile. The guide screamed in horror, realizing what it really was. A rather large monster was approaching them. An insect with 6 limbs. Patrick recognized this monster. It was a black mantis. The leader asked Fraser why he was so shocked. Crichton had no idea what could be dangerous about the black mantis. The guide replied that he was not sure about the details, but he had already seen one flying demonic beast that looked like a black mantis. The main character said that this beast measures 2 meters in height and 4 meters in length. The guy didn't know anything else. He didn't know the weaknesses of this monster and how it could be destroyed. There is no exact information about the monster. Patrick emphasized that the rank of this monster is unknown, so they had better retreat. Crichton expressed a crazy idea: to fight the monster and find out its rank. Patrick had ironclad arguments on this score. Just because the rank of a monster is unknown does not mean that it is weak. But the most important thing is that this creature calmly entered the territory of the raptors. The guide was sure that this predator was stronger than raptors and, accordingly, had at least the 9th rank. The black mantis flew up, inspecting the room. The hunters froze in anticipation of what would happen next. The leader, trying to get his bearings, ordered everyone to beware of their surroundings. The mantis disappeared from sight, but Crichton ordered to maintain a fighting position. Ryan was a little confused. He was worried that the room was dark and it was unknown where this monster would fly out. Colin responded by demanding not to panic. The guide turned to Miss Dean for help. Her special vision was required here. Annabelle already guessed it. She peered into the darkness, looking for the monster. Examining every part of the room, the girl said that there was no monster here. Fraser was nervous, once again asking if Miss Dean saw the monster. But the girl only answered that she had examined everything but could not find him. Team members formed a circle, standing with their backs to each other. The monster could appear at any moment. Annabelle, in desperation, had already begun to ask the monster to show herself. Crichton looked at the girl and her strange search method in bewilderment. At that moment, Fraser caught some sound of approaching. If you carefully follow the source of the sound, you can find a monster. The guide was sure that if everyone remained calm and responded in time, there would be no problems. But it seemed that it was already too late. The mantis was right behind the guy's back. The main character finally felt a presence. But the guy didn't understand when this monster managed to come from behind. Another moment and the mantis decided to attack. Fraser reacted with lightning speed, using his blade. Then there's a bright flash and the blade flies out of the main character's hands and he himself loses his balance. Next to him is Annabelle. Her scream pierced the silence of the night. The praying mantis disappeared somewhere again, and the main character found himself simply sitting on the floor. The girl was worried whether he was okay. He was fine, but he dropped his sword. Miss Dean looked questioningly at Patrick. What to do now without a sword? Annabelle screamed, trying to warn the main character that the praying mantis was back again, about to attack from above. Fraser was left without a sword, but Colin and Ryan were already rushing to the rescue. The main character instinctively shrank when he heard the clink of metal nearby. The leader arrived just in time, preventing the monster from striking. Crichton ordered the guide to urgently get out of here, and somehow he would deal with the monster himself. The leader beat mercilessly, but this had no effect on the mantis yet. Patrick obeyed the leader, leaving him alone with the monster. Annabelle was worried about how the situation was. Fraser explained that they were at a disadvantage because of the darkness. This time Ryan completely agreed with the guide, regretting that there was no lighting here. The main character called out to the leader but did not hear anything in response. The guy felt another item from the antique store in his pocket. Now is the time to use it. Patrick pulled the pin and threw a grenade approximately at the place where the leader was. In a second, the room was illuminated with bright light. The leader looked around and discovered a praying mantis hiding at the very top. It seemed to Colin that the monster was looking at him with arrogance. The leader suggested that the monster still go down because the conversation was not over yet. Ryan was already rushing to help Crichton. The leader at the last moment tried to stop the daredevil from making a grave mistake. Now was not the case. Colin stood with his head up, trying not to let the praying mantis out of sight. For the leader, it was a matter of principle to deal with the monster himself, without Ryan's help. Patrick understood the leader's tactics. After all, if the two of them wave their weapons, and even in a room with limited lighting and space, they can only harm each other. So Colin made a smart decision. The plan was excellent, if not for one nuance. The leader had problems even with the raptor. In addition, the black mantis is many times stronger than the raptor. It wasn't just the monster's strength. Unlike the raptor, the mantis was smart enough to distract its prey by making noise in a different direction, away from itself to hide its location. Patrick was very worried about how the leader intended to fight him. Colin called the praying mantis to him. He was so eager to deprive the monster of its head. The main character noticed with alarm that the leader had raised his strength indicators to the maximum. In fact, he was at the limit of his capabilities. The other members were also very worried about their leader. The praying mantis was waiting for the right moment to attack. The next moment, the monster rushed down on its victim. Crichton was ready. He was just waiting for the monster to fly as close as possible. The leader's sword every now and then hit the claws of the mantis with a ringing sound. The monster rose up again to take aim. Colin was waiting for the next attack of the monster, confidently holding his axe in his hand. The monster swung its claw. The leader barely managed to dodge. The slightest mistake on his part, and the monster would cut off his head. Crichton swung his axe, trying to reach the monster, but the beast was very dexterous. The leader was already starting to get annoyed that he was messing around with the monster for so long. The man ran forward, intending to kill the monster with the next blow of the axe. It was quite unexpected. But the leader noticed that the monster was blocking his attacks. Colin was very angry. In his mind, the monster should have already been lying dead on the floor. The mantis sparkled with its eyes in the twilight, examining Crichton. The beast was also surprised that his victim held out for so long. The monster attacked the leader again, this time much more seriously. What happened to Colin is unknown. Ryan tries to shout to the leader, but his cry is drowned in the general chaos. The next moment, the monster finds himself face to face with Crichton, who successfully holds the defense. But still, the leader is forced to admit that if the mantis continues to press, he will lose. The beast's eyes sparkled angrily. He hated his opponent. No one had ever resisted him for so long. Colin prevented the monster from delivering a fatal blow. The man held back the monster's attacks, despite the fact that it still managed to deliver a strong claw blow to the man's leg. Bradbury was furious. The guy really wanted to intervene in this battle, but he understood that this would only create additional difficulties for both hunters. The praying mantis was practically next to him. Its claws kept piercing the floor. The monster's paw, cutting through the air, almost hit Ryan. Dodging the attack, Bradbury ducked down, almost squatting down. The monster intended to destroy everyone. Ryan was upset that he couldn't control the situation. The anticipation of the outcome of the battle was unbearable. The team members watched in horror what was happening. Were they really destined to lose this battle? Only now the leader felt a wild pain in his leg. The wound was bleeding heavily. Unfortunately, during the entire battle, not a single serious damage was caused to the mantis. The leader felt that he was beginning to lose his strength. The beast turned out to be too strong. The next moment, the mantis delivers an even stronger blow. The monster's claw pierces Colin's shoulder. Crichton was ready to admit defeat. The battle was essentially one-sided. The advantage was on the side of the beast. The leader hung weakly on the claw of the mantis. The weapon fell from his wounded hand. The monster sharply waved its paw, lifting the caught enemy into the air. Crichton was practically defeated, although life had not yet left his wounded body. The praying mantis peered at its victim, realizing that the person's resistance had already come to naught. All that remained was to strike the control blow. The gaze of the mantis snatched from the general noise two more victims, more defenseless and weak. Patrick and Annabelle stood right in front of the monster. But the main character was not going to just give up while there was little hope. It was his turn to take the fight. Based on what he saw, Fraser concluded that the beast was at least 8th rank, and maybe worse, 5th rank. Everything seemed hopeless. Patrick saw that the main weapon of the praying mantis was its front legs, and they were stronger than Damascus steel. The guy will die before he has a chance to chop off the monster's limbs. Fraser was extremely necessary to determine where the weak point of the monster was. The head, neck, or maybe the chest. The beast stopped in front of the people, choosing the right moment to attack. Patrick had the feeling that the praying mantis, in addition to everything else, also uses tactics to intimidate its prey. At this terrible moment, the main character noticed something. A faint ray of hope for victory appeared. The monster stood so close that the main character noticed the connecting part between the legs and torso of the beast. This place looked weak and unprotected. Patrick was almost overjoyed. Had he really found it? Now, the main character no longer doubted that the weak point had been discovered. All that remained was to strike there. The guy swung, and with all his strength thrust the blade into this weak spot. But nothing happened in response, although Patrick definitely felt that the sword had reached its target. The monster threw Fraser aside with force. Now only the defenseless Miss Dean was in front of the monster. The main character saw the monster examining him lying on the floor. The Mantis was in no hurry to finish off his opponent. In the next second, the monster's claw pierces very close to the guy's head. Just a couple of inches separated Patrick from inevitable death. The Mantis stood right above his lying opponent, deciding what to do next. There was no way out of the situation, and the guy simply closed his eyes, preparing to die. Thoughts rushed through Fraser's head. He exposed himself too much to the monster. If even the team leader could not cope with the beast, then how can a simple guide resist it? Fraser no longer tried to resist. He just lay there and waited for death. At this moment, some subtle noise was heard. The monster felt it too, turning its head and listening. The beast was distracted from its victim and peered at something located in front. The main character watched the praying mantis in surprise. The monster reacted to the sound. The monster's eyes lingered in the darkness, but Fraser could not determine his emotions. It seems that the victim lying right in front of him was no longer of interest to the monster. All the monster's attention was focused on the source of the sound. It was incredible. But the praying mantis left its victim and ran away. Patrick remained lying there in bewilderment instead of getting up and hiding. From the excess of surging emotions, the main character shouted joyfully, "He is still alive." Annabelle was also alive. The girl ran up to the guide to find out if he was okay. Having come to his senses a little, Fraser wondered why the praying mantis just left. Was it because his opponent was too weak? There was another oddity. This incomprehensible beeping sound. The main character had never heard it before. Perhaps this is a way of communication between demonic beasts. Fraser's train of thought was disrupted by Annabelle. The girl doubted that he was okay and asked him to pull himself together. Patrick got up from the floor. He suddenly remembered that he had forgotten something important. The plan for protecting the city was still in force. In addition, Fraser still had the bracelet on his hand. The guide was worried about one incomprehensible moment. The guy asked Miss Dean if she had noticed how long these bracelets glowed. But the girl didn't even attach any importance to this. The guy explained that this is a signal that the barrier has been turned on again, which means that they need to return immediately. Annabelle was worried about Colin and Ryan. They were very hurt. Crichton lay motionless. It was unknown what was wrong with him. Bradbury was still sitting, holding his head, giving the impression that he was disoriented. Coming closer, the main character determined that the leader's heart was not hurt. The man was just unconscious. Patrick carefully lifted the wounded man and put him on his shoulders. There was nowhere to wait for help, so the main character was forced to take Crichton to the doctors himself. Ryan was also hurt, although not as seriously, so Fraser asked Annabelle to help him. Miss Dean could not refuse. They are one team. The guide immediately warned that the journey would be long, especially since there were wounded among them. The team needs to get to the barrier at all costs. In front of the entrance to the closed area, soldiers stood with a notepad in their hands. What was to be entered into the database evoked a feeling of horror. The bodies of those killed in the battle were laid out in neat rows on the ground. The count was already in the tens. The battle was unequal, and it would be surprising if someone managed to come out completely unharmed. The approaching soldier asked how many people were injured. The recorder said that in total there were 58 dead, 17 wounded, and 11 missing, for a total of 86 participants in the battle. His interlocutor admitted that this was not so bad. It turns out that the city suffered much greater losses. At that moment, the soldier's gaze was attracted to something. The second soldier also noticed something in the distance. A group of people was approaching the city. The travelers have already crossed the barrier. It was clear from the approaching wanderers that they also had to face something. Among them were seriously wounded. The wounded were immediately placed in the medical department. The corridors were suspiciously empty, and only one person walked slowly along the corridor. It was quiet everywhere, and only voices were heard from one room. The girl tried to reason with a capricious patient who did not want to eat. Miss Dean was angry with Colin's behavior. He needed to eat at least something to recover faster. Annabelle promised to use her fists if Cryan continues to be capricious, and even the fact that he is the leader of the team will not save him. It was clear from the girl's expression that she was not joking. Ryan and Patrick were also in the room, Both of them at that moment were glad that they were not in the leader's place. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Ryan asked who was there. A man in a business suit entered the room apologizing. The guest immediately went to the leader of the Marlin team, introducing himself as the deputy director of the city administration. The man's name was Michael Elmers. Colin said hello back and also introduced himself. The men shook hands. Mr. Elmers observed that Crichton was recovering quickly. Michael mentioned that all this was not without his help, because he himself had healing abilities. Colin decided to go straight to the purpose of this unexpected visit, asking what the city administration needed from his team. Michael refused to answer this question, citing the fact that he could not talk about it in front of everyone. The leader decided to show leniency towards the guest by asking the guys to leave the room. The young people obeyed, leaving the leader alone with the guest, but such oddity aroused their suspicion. The first thing Bradbury assumed was that a representative of the administration had come to discuss compensation for them. Miss Dean smiled. Will they really be granted citizenship? Ryan frankly believed that he was created to be a rich boy who knew no troubles. And the fact that he survived in these terrible deserts is simply a miracle. Fraser did not flatter himself with hopes of reward. The fact that a representative of the city administration personally came to talk with a desert resident was extremely suspicious. Michael smiled, calling it a miracle that all members of the team managed to survive. Crichton explained this by saying that they had received a good guide. Mr. Elmers countered that the guide was just an ordinary person. There was a questioning intonation in the visitor's voice, as if he himself doubted it. Colin admitted that he himself still couldn't believe that they managed it. Michael, after a short pause, said that in general the city administration was glad that all members of the Marlin team were able to return alive. The man's voice sounded extremely false. Mr. Elmers said that the administration was now in a difficult position because they had not expected this outcome. Colin couldn't believe what he just heard. The guest's words sounded ambiguous. The decision taken by the administration was met very aggressively by some team members. Ryan practically did not control his emotions. He was terribly angry. Patrick and Annabelle didn't know what to say. They were at a loss. The leader asked Bradbury to calm down and pull himself together. Ryan couldn't calm down. He refused to accept that the administration only gave them 2 citizenship slots. Bradbury was greatly outraged that these treasured places were given to Annabelle and Patrick. The leader tried to appear unperturbed. If the administration made such a decision, then they have no choice but to reconcile. Ryan was furious, openly considering the city administration to be lying creatures. The guy considered himself second in strength after the leader. And if Colin decided to sacrifice his right to citizenship, that is his own business. But Bradbury did not want to give up his place. Ryan didn't understand why the choice fell on Fraser, because he's not even a metahuman. Now Crichton was angry, demanding that Bradbury stop yelling at Fraser and Miss Dean. Patrick tried not to pay attention to Ryan's attacks. The guy assured that he was fine. These words infuriated Bradbury even more. Why shouldn't Fraser be okay? He's now a city dweller. The leader was tired of Ryan's protracted nagging. All this irritated him terribly. He once again asked the guy to calm down in the end. But Bradbury went too far, beginning to suspect everyone of intrigues against him. Ryan began to blame the leader for everything. That it was his decision, dictated by the fact that Patrick and Annabelle did not have close combat skills, and they still would not survive in zone. Crichton made it clear that he and Ryan would get all the remaining awards. Besides, they will still have a chance. But Bradbury was not satisfied with this situation. He was not interested in other awards. The main thing is his life. For his part, Ryan was right. No one knows when and who will die in the desert. Having finished his statements, the guy left, loudly slamming the door. Colin was grateful to Fraser for saving his life, and he advised him to accept citizenship without any twinges of conscience. The main character assured that he would accept this citizenship with gratitude. Be that as it may, Patrick was not going to back down from his decision. The main character admitted that he accepted this task precisely for the opportunity to obtain citizenship, and he does not intend to give up the reward for which he risked his life. But there was another problem. Would the hunter Bradbury come to terms with this? Regarding this, the leader assured that Ryan was just hot-tempered, but would soon calm down. Patrick didn't really believe what the leader was saying, but it would be great if everything was as he said. Finally, everything became quiet in the department. Night has come. The hunters settled down in their beds, trying to sleep after a difficult day. But Fraser couldn't sleep. Something was alarming him. Patrick saw that Ryan was also awake, and he quietly called out to this rebel. Bradbury did not respond. Instead, he stood up and quietly walked over to the leader's bed. Ryan stood there, gritting his teeth. The blade of a blade flashed in his hands. Patrick lay with his eyes closed, driving away stupid thoughts. What seemed to him simply could not have happened. Ryan took out his sword and raised his hand to strike. Crichton, suspecting nothing, continued to sleep. Bradbury gripped the hilt of his sword, preparing to strike. Another moment, and Ryan forcefully thrust his sword into the body of the defenseless leader. Waking up from pain, Crichton automatically grabbed the attacker by the throat. There was disappointment and surprise in the leader's eyes. He would never have thought that Bradbury was capable of this. Ryan only wheezed in response that the leader was to blame for everything. Crichton groaned, unable to answer anything. He tried to stop Bradbury. The main character continued to lie with his eyes closed. His sleep was unsettling, as if he felt something. Ryan stood by the leader's bed, still indignant that a creature without abilities received the right to reside before him. Crichton said nothing, his hand hanging lifelessly down. Leaving the leader alone, the rebel headed to his bed, repeating that he would never return to the desert again. Turning his head towards Patrick, Ryan glanced sideways in his direction. He knew that the guide had heard everything and therefore asked him directly about it. Without waiting for an answer, Bradbury grabbed the bed curtain, intending to force Fraser to answer. Approaching the guide's bed, Ryan raised his sword to strike with the words that everyone should get what they deserve. Bradbury thrust his sword forcefully into the place where Patrick should have been lying, repeating that it was all because of him. Not a single sound was made in response. Ryan abruptly threw back the blanket and, to his surprise, did not find a body there. A grenade left by the guide immediately caught my eye. Bradbury stared at this thing, not knowing what to do. A moment later, a loud bang was heard and a bright flash blinded everything around. The eyes, which had not yet recovered from the previous incident, suffered again. Bradbury didn't see anything. Taking advantage of Ryan's moment of helplessness, the main character attacked him from behind. Patrick jumped onto Bradbury's shoulders, raising his dagger over him. A second later, this dagger plunged into the neck of the blinded enemy with a sweep. Voices calling to kill again began to sound in the main character's head. The voice ordered to kill and take away their power. Inside one body, two personalities fought. One ordered to kill and take away their power, and the other understood that all this was wrong and should not be like this. Fraser realized that at that time it was not his imagination. The voice really sounded very insistent. And now the same situation is happening again. While the main character was trying to figure himself out, his opponent quickly got his bearings and now made an attempt to free himself from the grip of a weak opponent. Fraser lost his balance, hitting his head painfully against the wall. Now Ryan hated Patrick even more. Although he tried to take his life anyway, Bradbury was much stronger than the common man who attacked him, and had almost freed himself from capture. A second later, Fraser was already lying on the floor, unable to get up. Ryan stood over him, still not believing that a simple weakling had decided to attack him. Out of anger, Bradbury no longer knew what he was doing. He abruptly pulled out the dagger Fraser had left behind. There was no pain. There was only hatred, and the desire to take revenge for everything. Patrick was shocked by what Ryan was doing. This man seemed invulnerable, as if he did not feel pain. Bradbury mockingly compared himself and the guide, a meta-human and a loser without abilities. Fraser looked at his opponent, not knowing what else to expect from him. This guy was unpredictable. Ryan tried with his last strength to reach the guide with his hand, but in the end he fell and passed out. The main character looked in horror at what happened. He still took the life of his own kind, not a monster, but a person like himself. Fraser tried to come to his senses and try to think rationally, but nothing worked. Something was happening inside the main character that had never happened before. The guy had the idea that this was most likely an awakening. Some kind of power was arising within him. Some strange glow appeared. His hand became different. Most of all, Patrick was afraid of losing consciousness here, in this place. It was necessary to hide the traces of the crime, to divert suspicion from oneself. Fraser picked up his dagger and quickly left the crime scene. Having barely had time to throw his dagger out the window, Patrick heard a voice calling him. Crichton was still alive and he was calling for Fraser. The main character looked back in horror at the voice calling him. The worst part was that the leader most likely saw what really happened. Everything was mixed up in my head. I wanted to forget everything as soon as possible. The main character came to his senses already in a chair in a large room. The lamp burned brightly above him, and Michael Elmers stood next to him. The deputy director said that he was starting the interrogation. Mr. Elmers said that last morning the guards went to the ward after they heard someone screaming. Entering the room, they found a murder scene. 1 witness and 3 victims were found in the room. According to Michael, the incident happened a few hours before the discovery of the bodies, in the middle of the night. Hunter Bradbury died due to arterial bleeding. Hunter Crichton was also mortally wounded and died of blood loss. Mr. Elmers also said that the only witness was the Hunter Dean. She was excluded from the list of suspects after checking the alibi and evidence. Michael told Patrick that he was found unconscious with traces of blunt blows. Everyone was on the Marlin team from Area 17, and now Fraser was the only one who could testify. Mr. Elmers knew that Fraser had been the team's guide for 3 years, and that he had twice volunteered to defend the city as a man without abilities. Having finished his report, Michael, now calling Patrick a townsman, asked the question whether everything that was told was true. The main character answered the question asked in the affirmative. Then Mr. Elmers decided to ask directly what happened last night. Fraser said that a stranger broke into the room. Michael asked if it was really a stranger. Patrick repeated once again that a stranger suddenly burst into their room at night and attacked them. Elmers then asked another question, whether Fraser remembered anything about the attacker's appearance or his clothing. But the main character replied that it was too dark. Michael was at a loss, not knowing how to close the case. At that moment he was called out. The senator was standing on the threshold. He gently hinted that the incident was related to the people from the desert, so it was not worth such attention. The senator made it clear that the unknown assailant could be blamed in this case, just as the guide said. Now the main thing for the city is to strengthen patrols. Elmers would be happy to agree with the senator, but still considered it necessary to point out that the incident was very strange. The senator paused, preparing to listen to the deputy's arguments. Michael said that the photographs show a huge amount of blood, while no traces of blood were found outside the room, as well as shoe marks. All of this taken together cast doubt on Fraser's evidence. Accordingly, Elmers believed that the guide had perjured himself in order to cover up his own crime. Patrick asked to be given the opportunity to speak out, since he is now a suspect. The main character recalled that he is called a city dweller without abilities. Based on this, it turns out that Patrick was able to resist 2 metahumans with physical enhancements. So he asked if they really thought he could do it. Michael had to admit that from a logical point of view, this really looks unrealistic. Fraser continued to defend himself, recalling that after the mission he should have received the status of a citizen, and therefore what would be the point of risking his life by foolishly attacking 2 metahumans when he himself had already received the desired status. Elmers had to admit that the suspect's denial sounded logical. Plus, Team Marlene is an assault force that was barely able to get citizenship. Addressing the senator, the deputy continued to unwind the logical chain. The crime could have been committed by another metahuman who desired the status of a city resident. And there was also another interesting point. Traces of a fierce struggle were discovered. Michael continued that Fraser, not being a metahuman, is a criminal. Then he must have much more serious injuries. Patrick said nothing in response, but his thoughts were completely different. In fact, he was beaten quite badly, and the main character's body was able to survive all this only thanks to the subsequent awakening. The senator had only one question. Why not close the case right now? But the deputy still had one last trump card. All of the above is based on the assumption that Mr. Fraser is not a metahuman. The senator did not yet understand what Elmers was getting at. The deputy invited the witness to enter. Patrick was wary of what kind of witness there was, because only members of Marlin's team could know about him. The door to the room opened, but no one had entered yet. Patrick peered intensely into the doorway, not even knowing who might be there. A minute later, the silhouette of a girl with glasses appeared on the threshold. The deputy asked the lady who came in to introduce herself. The girl introduced herself. It was Marie, a researcher from the city's Research and Development Department. The main character froze in anticipation. What could this girl know? The deputy asked what kind of work she was doing. Marie revealed that she determines the characteristics of metahumans' powers when she gives them tasks. Michael asked the girl to clarify how she defines characteristics. Marie admitted that she has the ability to determine whether a person is a metahuman. Elmers explained to the girl that it was precisely because of her abilities that she was called as a witness. As for Fraser, the deputy again asked if he was truly sure that he was not a metahuman. The main character once again confirmed that he was not previously a metahuman. Mentally, the guy added that it was like this until a certain moment. The deputy, meanwhile, asked Marie to stand directly in front of Patrick. Michael asked if there were any cases where a metahuman awakened during life. For example, initially Patrick Fraser could have been an ordinary person. Elmers assured that if the guide gained powers on this mission, then he would become a suspect. Marie approached the main character and looked at him intently. It seemed to Fraser that the wait for the girl's answer dragged on endlessly. He was all tense. Marie's words at their first meeting surfaced in Pranya's memory. If he is a metahuman, then he is not ready to help. Even then, the girl tried to examine him. The girl then perceived the situation as very strange, because she definitely sensed signs of a metahuman in this guy. The deputy insisted on a precise answer. Marie had to either confirm or refute her assumptions. The girl again asked Fraser to let her touch his hands. Marie closed her eyes and completely concentrated on her feelings. The young lady held Patrick's hands in her palms, trying to figure out the key points. A light glow emanated from the palms of both the researcher and the subject. The main character felt a little uncomfortable from such manipulations. The guy closed his eyes tightly, as if this could interfere with the process. A voice came into my memory, calling to kill. I also remembered the picture with the dying leader. With the last of his strength, the man then asked Patrick to run away until Ryan killed him. The main character was struck by the fact that Crichton could not realize that the hunter Bradbury was already dead. And even in this state, the leader was worried about the guide. Then Cullen fell silent, and fell silent forever. Fraser couldn't believe what happened. He tried to shout to the leader, but there was only silence in response. And then something strange began to happen. It was some kind of process incomprehensible to the main character. Patrick's body was changing. The process did not occur externally, but somewhere inside. There was some kind of pulsation in the body, the same as when Fraser first awakened, and now, it turns out, he has awakened again. Patrick was confused in his guesses. It doesn't feel like waking up, so it was something different, something stronger. The main character was shaking, as if something was breaking inside, only to be recreated, but in a more powerful form. Then Patrick simply lost consciousness, and when he woke up he didn't feel anything special. And now the main character was waiting for the verdict. The girl next to him tried to see in him something that he himself did not yet understand, and maybe even was afraid of. Finally, Marie opened her eyes and looked in surprise at the object of her research. The girl turned to Elmer and said that she was finished. The deputy asked to announce the result. It was clear that the girl was worried. She drew out her words, as if the answer was difficult for her. After all, she said that Patrick Fraser is not a metahuman. Michael could not believe what was said. He asked the girl to repeat the answer. But Marie declared with absolute certainty that this guy was not a metahuman. Patrick knew for sure that Marie felt something. She clearly realized that he was awakened. It looks like the girl is up to something. Since the results were clear, the senator proposed that Marie be released. The deputy still had doubts, but there was nothing to be done, and he reluctantly agreed. The check was completed. In this regard, the senator expressed his decision to consider this case as a case in which someone who had not received citizenship tried to kill those who were able to obtain this citizenship. As a result, instructions were given to include all metahumans who did not receive citizenship, but who took part in the defense, into the circle of suspects, and also to check their alibis. The deputy had one last question: what to do with Fraser? Patrick, without hesitation, answered this question. He renounces his citizenship and returns to the desert. Elmer's expected anything, but not this. The man explained to the guide that the city administration does not insist on this. Consequently, he was interested in what caused this decision. The main character claimed that from the very beginning, he believed that the leader Colin Crichton and the hunter Annabelle Dean were worthy of citizenship rights. Even such arguments did not convince the deputy, because for the sake of the opportunity to live in the city, the guide went through so many difficulties. If he renounces his residency rights this time, he will have to go through the same process again. Michael was quite perceptive by nature, and now he wanted to know what the true reason for Patrick's refusal to live in the city and return to the desert was. Fraser replied that it was in citizenship itself that the reason lay. If Patrick remains a citizen, he will eventually become a suspect in the murder of his comrades, with whom he spent 3 years side by side. Also, the main character allegedly did not want to accept something that would ultimately put his life in danger from a real uncaught criminal. The senator replied that everything Patrick said sounded quite logical, so there was no longer any suspicion of him. But it seems that even these arguments did not convince the deputy. After long, painful interrogations, Fraser was finally released. Life in the city went on as usual. It seemed like no one cared about what happened. Before leaving town, Fraser wanted to see Miss Dean one last time. They just stood there silently, looking at each other. Who knows? Maybe fate will bring Patrick together with this sweet girl again. As Annabelle left, she turned around again, waving goodbye. Fraser sadly looked after the girl with whom he had gone through so much. The main character walked slowly through the city, as if he was trying to stay here as long as possible. But the decision had already been made. Suddenly, a female voice called out to the main character. Patrick looked back. It was Marie. The girl hurried towards him with a worried look. The girl was slightly out of breath, trying to catch up with Fraser. Smiling, she joked that he walked too fast. The guy looked at Marie, trying to predict what she might need from him. The girl said that she was very glad that they never realized that Patrick is a metahuman, and now he can safely leave the city. The main character guessed that the girl knew who he really was. But still, the guy did not understand what plans she had for him, that she did not say anything to the tribunal. Fraser told the girl that he assumed that he had awakened because of that incident. In fact, Marie understood much more. She assumed that Patrick had unintentionally killed his comrades. Most likely, it was simply impossible to do otherwise. Fraser asked directly why the girl did not tell the tribunal the truth if she knew everything. Marie replied that the real reason was that she was interested in his ability. The girl said that what comes from Fraser is something completely new and exciting. Marie explained that Patrick gives off completely different signals than other metahumans. The main character became interested in what exactly this girl meant. The young lady asked if Fraser knew that metahumans are divided into 6 categories. The young man replied that he was aware of this. Marie explained that most metahumans fall into these 6 categories. These 6 categories included physical enhancement, supernatural powers, magical technology, taming evil, psychopathy, and magic. But like Senator Beatrice of Henderson, there are metahumans who defy classification and who give off different signals. Patrick was surprised. He admitted that he always believed that Beatrice belonged to the category of supernatural forces. Marie confirmed that this is partly true. Beatrice's ability to create a barrier around the city refers specifically to supernatural forces. Senator Beatrice was the only one who managed to maintain a barrier several kilometers in size, and she maintained this barrier for several years. And now Marie was wondering if Patrick had any strange sensations during his awakening. The main character thought about it, remembering those moments. The problem is that Patrick had such feelings that he will never forget them, and he must share these feelings with at least someone, otherwise he will simply go crazy. Marie seemed like the kind of person you could trust. The young man admitted that he heard voices. The girl explained that voices in the head are a sign of metahumans with psychopathy. Such people often hear orders in their heads. Marie asked what exactly that voice was saying. Fraser did not dare to tell the whole truth, lying that he did not remember all the details. Although the girl acts friendly, he has no reason to be completely honest with her. Marie was surprised that Fraser did not remember such important details. The girl admitted that she senses a certain feeling from Patrick, and this feeling was nothing more than a similar signal as Senator Beatrice. The main character agreed that it wasn't that bad, but he still didn't fully understand. At the same time, he himself believed that his abilities most likely work as an enhancing type, but the same signal comes from these abilities as from the amazing defender of the city. Patrick expected more specific explanations about this from the girl. Marie explained that no one expects the same power from Beatrice from Fraser. He has just awakened. Now only Patrick began to understand a little. The catastrophe associated with the appearance of demonic beasts was of terrifying proportions. This disaster almost pushed humanity into the abyss, but it was able to survive. Thanks to the emergence of metahumans, cities like Henderson were able to rebuild. Humanity has been reborn thanks to metahumans. Marie wondered if unusual people got together, what kind of miracle they could create. The only thing that worries everyone is how much longer Beatrice can hold out. Over the past decades, she has sacrificed her health, maintaining the barrier alone. One day Crichton told Patrick that there were rumors that Beatrice hardly slept. Now the main character understood where such rumors came from, even among the inhabitants of the desert. Fraser tried to imagine what it would be like to be a superhuman like Beatrice. This girl, fragile at first glance, concealed a tremendous strength that helped the city survive. At some point, Patrick thought that they had locked eyes, he and Beatrice. He was sure she was looking at him. Marie said that the senator is doing everything possible with the help of his remaining forces to protect the townspeople. The main character had a choice, to believe this young researcher or not, but her ability to identify metahumans confirmed this feeling, and it was about him. Marie had no doubt that Fraser was an unusual metahuman with the same great potential as Senator Beatrice. The girl believed that he would end the battle against the demonic beasts, and might even be able to save humanity. Patrick feared this most of all. What if he fails in such a great mission? Too many events fell on the guy. The death of 2 people, a trial, a double awakening, and words calling for killing metahumans. His head was ready to explode from everything that had happened. And now, the salvation of all humanity. It all started with the opening of the gate, which released the beasts. It ended with the almost complete destruction of humanity. And this all happened only a few decades ago. Those who survived and settled in the desert dream of only one thing: to survive. What was important for the main character was not salvation. Survival upon returning to the desert was important to him. Only the strongest survive here. He who does not know his own strength perishes, and he dies not only from the paws of the beast, but also from the hands of man. Therefore, as a new metahuman, it was now important for Patrick to find out the nature of his powers. The main character was greeted by destroyed cities and deserted lands, a picture familiar to him. Fraser chose Detroit. Here he decided to test his strength, because this is the best place for training the newly awakened. The guy stopped, listening to the sounds of the deserted city. A growl came from the darkness. The beast noticed the lone traveler and was now waiting for the right moment. The darkness of the opening was illuminated by the red eyes of the monster. The beast watched its prey, anticipating an easy victory. The monster was huge. It came close to the guy and was preparing to pounce at any moment. Patrick did not expect that he would meet a demonic beast like this right away. He was not yet ready for this. Saliva flowed from the monster's mouth. He had not eaten for a long time. The beast had huge paws with razor-sharp claws. There was practically no chance of surviving a battle with him. Fraser easily determined that in front of him was a rank 16 demonic beast, a poisonous cat. The monster took off and was rapidly approaching Patrick. Another moment and the cat will tear its victim into pieces. The beast, having accelerated, tried to attack the guy, but he, bending down, deftly dodged. Suddenly something fell from above, falling to the ground with a roar. Fraser was surprised. These were cannonballs, but it's not clear where they came from. The monster, not having time to group itself, flew further. Having stopped, the monster again froze in anticipation. Perhaps the cat, among other things, also used tactics to intimidate the victim. The monster, opening its mouth, roared loudly, showing off its sharp fangs. It attacked again, and again the main character managed to dodge. The main character's plans were disrupted, but that's not the problem. First, he had to deal with the poisonous cat. A sewer hatch caught the guy's eye. This was what we needed. Patrick grabbed the handles of the hatch, trying to lift it. In reality, it turned out to be not so simple. The hatch was incredibly heavy and screwed down tightly. At the same moment, the force activated in the guy's body and the iron gave in. Placing the hatch cover in front of him as a shield, Fraser began to call the beast to him. The monster growled, but was in no hurry to attack. The cat hung from above, as if taking aim at where to strike. Patrick concentrated, identifying the monster's weak point. A second later, the monster whined in pain, having received a powerful blow to the jaw. Unfortunately, such a blow was not enough. The monster was still unharmed. Fraser grouped all his forces and repeated the iron throw, aiming at the monster's weak point. The blow hit the cat right on the bridge of his nose. The main character hoped that this would cause at least some damage to the monster. But alas, this time the beast also survived. Fraser raised the iron lid again, without giving up his attempts to achieve the desired result. The guy raised his gun above his head and rushed forward. This time Patrick decided to try another place of the beast to attack: the cat's fangs. The guy's calculations turned out to be correct, and the monster lost some of its teeth. The main character swung again. The beast had to be finished off without allowing it to come to its senses. Fraser's entire attention was concentrated in one place. It seems that he finally identified the monster's weak point. After a series of continuous, powerful blows, the creature could not stand it and fell. The guy sighed with relief. The demonic beast was dead, but there was something else that needed to be done. Patrick reached for his sword. With the help of a sharp blade of a blade, the main character opened the skin of the beast. He needed to finish one more thing. Inside the animal, right between the entrails, there were excellent cores from the 16th rank. These cores had a certain value, as did any weapon or device for survival in the desert. The beast had strong, dense insides that could be used instead of ropes. Patrick formed a securing knot, trying to make something like a carry. Valuable cannonballs lay on the ground and they had to be collected, every single one. The main character collected the kernels into a bag formed from the inside. The guy was pleased with himself. If he managed to kill the poisonous cat, then now he became a metahuman of the 16th rank. For Fraser, this was a huge success, given that this was his first combat test. It was necessary to continue on our way. Finally, the main character faced a destroyed city called the Desert Oasis. The sign said that you can get everything here. It was surprisingly quiet around. This aroused suspicion. There were traces of recent battles on the ground. Patrick went up to one such puddle and touched it with his fingers. The blood on the ground has not yet clotted. Much was strange here. For example, there were traces of blood, but there was no body nearby. The conclusions suggested themselves. A killer was operating here. Suddenly, something alerted the main character. He felt someone's presence. Someone was hiding inside the building. This was someone clumsy for not being able to keep quiet. Patrick automatically reached for his sword. The guy abruptly pulled back the boards covering the entrance and looked inside. In front of him on the floor, huddled together, sat frightened children. Fraser asked the kids if they lived here. Suddenly, someone else approached the main character from behind. Patrick looked around carefully. A man in uniform was running straight towards him. A dagger was sparkling in the stranger's hands. An unknown person tried to attack Fraser, but he did not let him approach him. The stranger behaved strangely, trying to attack a person like himself. Fraser guessed that the man was trying to overcome him. Having run up properly, the stranger again attacked the main character. This time, the stranger decided to attack from above. But Patrick was undoubtedly stronger. The main character threw the enemy with force, knocking him down. The man in uniform stood up, rubbing the bruised area. He understood that he had a pretty strong opponent in front of him. Within a second, the stranger reached for something hidden behind his back. Fraser warily watched the stranger's every move. The opponent had a pistol in his hands. He pointed it directly at Patrick, ordering him to put down his weapon and raise his hands above his head. Next, the guy told Fraser to slowly turn towards the wall. Frightened children ran out from their shelter, seeking protection from this stranger. Patrick had to obey. Turning to the wall, he still tried to establish contact with this stranger. Having asked the enemy to lower his weapon, the main character said his name and said that he was a representative of Nod. But it seems that the name Nod meant nothing to the stranger. Fraser tried to explain that he had no intention of harming them. He was simply passing by. The stranger from Nod did not care whether the person was standing in front of him or not. He demanded that Patrick put everything he had on the ground and leave. Realizing that the enemy was morally impenetrable, the main character decided to speak more harshly, asking the stranger if he would really decide to rob the metahuman from Nod. The stranger was surprised whether this was a real metahuman. Fraser suggested the guy check and see for himself. Without waiting for an answer, Patrick punched the wall, easily breaking through it. The sight they saw plunged everyone watching into a state of slight shock. Still facing the wall, Fraser said that since these people live in the desert, they know what Nod is. The stranger continued to aim at Patrick, muttering something about the last law of the desert. Now turning to face the stranger, Fraser continued the conversation, realizing that the person was aware of such nuances. The main character clarified that Nod does not rob, but only accepts tasks for a reasonable price. The stranger did not let him finish, reminding Patrick to turn his face to the wall. Seeing that the man opposite was not getting his grievances, the main character said that if someone from Nod gets hurt, then Nod will take revenge. The stranger was silent, not knowing what to do now. In addition, Fraser stated that the guy would not fire anyway, because this gun does not use the power of fire. The main character asked whether the shot was fired using the energy of the core. Again, without waiting for an answer, the main character explained that given the fact that each shot consumes the energy of the core, costing as food for several days, it would be extremely unwise to pull the trigger. Patrick once again reminded that he just wants to stay in a safe place for a few days, after which he will quietly disappear. Finally, the stranger agreed, saying that he believed in what was said. But in return, he demanded that Fraser give all the cannonballs he had as collateral until these few days passed. Patrick, lost in thought, looked intently at the man opposite. In the end, the main character agreed to this condition, throwing the bag to the stranger and reminding him that if anything happened, he could return these cores by force. The stranger grabbed the bag, still clarifying that Patrick was mistaken about something. The guy cocked the trigger, intending to fire a shot. The cannonball that flew out of the pistol hit the wall and rebounded back into the chamber. The stranger explained that each shot actually consumes a valuable resource, so he cannot shoot whenever he pleases. But such a shot can be fired as many times as you like, as long as there is at least one core available. The main character was very surprised, because from a full charge there were completely different sensations. The technology that increases the efficiency of core energy and makes it possible to use it has often been referred to, in fact, as magical abilities. Finally, the stranger decided to take off his helmet and show his face. The guy introduced himself as Adrian Gate, and without lowering his pistol, ordered to follow him. Together with the children, the guys entered the building and headed up the stairs. The main character asked why they live so high. Adrian explained that if they dealt only with animals, they would live lower, but being at a height served as an advantage against people. Patrick thought so. It was all because of the killers. Having risen to the right place, Fraser stopped. There was amazement in his gaze. There were women in the neatly decorated room. Some of them were busy with some monotonous work. Others held weapons in their hands, At the sight of the traveler entering, the women began to whisper about something. Finally, one of them called the main character by name, clarifying, just in case, whether this was true. The girl's name was Raina. She was the leader of the Detroit Orphanage. Even here, a gun was pointed at Patrick. Raina said that in the old days she would have treated her guest better. The main character determined that an alert system had already been installed here. Perhaps this is their leader's ability. Raina explained that they were currently at war with the assassins and therefore had a shortage of provisions. The girl said that demonic beasts were not the only enemies in the desert. There are also killers who have abandoned humanity and began to hunt people. Fraser confirmed that the killers disturbing the order in the desert were also a headache for Nod. But the guy was interested in what was going on about the deal. Raina admitted that she was desperate. The girl clarified whether Nod always demands something in return. Patrick confirmed that this is true, but for his part, he would like to give them a chance. Raina wondered what kind of chance we were talking about. The main character replied that he first needed to familiarize himself with the situation, and then discuss the details of the deal. First of all, he was interested in where the killers lived and how many there were. The women said the killers live at a driver's license testing center east of here and there are about 10 of them. Fraser was surprised. 10 is not so much. Moreover, the shelter has a warning system installed. Raina said that they killed many bandits, but they also lost no less of their own. Previously, there were more than 100 murderers. For the main character, all this looked strange. There were more than 100 bandits. It would be difficult for them to get food with so many people. Raina partly agreed with Patrick, but there was one caveat. In fact, bandits eat human flesh. Fraser was shocked by this news. It turns out that there are also cannibals nearby. Raina apparently decided to shock the guy even more by declaring that there is a much bigger problem than cannibalism. And this problem was that the killers, in addition, are also metahumans with close combat skills. Patrick asked if they were strong. Raina did not go into details. She only said that even if the bandits are not particularly strong, they remain metahumans in any case. One of the girls admitted that most of these killers are quite weak. And Raina added that the leader of the bandits caused a lot of problems. Raina wanted only one thing: to kill those crazy bastards for driving them into a cage like chickens. Freeing all these people from the problems that the killers bring them was Raina's main dream, and in this, she was supported by all the residents of the shelter. The main character was silent. At that moment, a decision was ripening in his head. Finally, the guy said that he was ready to accept the task of eliminating the killers, and he wanted to deal with this on his own. Raina was grateful for this, but as she said, they had nothing to give in return. Patrick objected because there was still something. The main character wanted to be shown a local magic technician. Adrian was very surprised by this statement from the guest. This statement made Raina think. The girl didn't quite trust this stranger yet. Well, the guest's wish turned out to be quite acceptable, and Raina led Fraser up the steps under the watchful eye of her guard. Adrian still had no reason to trust the guest. In light of recent events, this was understandable. Soon they entered the room. There were bundles of drawings everywhere on the shelves. Gate called out to the owner of the room, distracting her from her work. A cute girl, Minnie, was sitting at the table. Seeing visitors on the threshold, she was distracted from her studies. Raina asked if the work was going well. Minnie was upset. Even if she wanted to test the artifacts, she didn't have the cores to do so. Fraser did not expect such a young lady to be a magical technician. Minnie asked who the guy was with them. Adrian replied that this was a meta-human from Nod who would help them. Raina told Minnie that this man wanted to ask her for something. Looking at all these devices on the table, Patrick asked the young lady if she herself creates all these things. Minnie was a little embarrassed, but confirmed that she did not create all this herself, although the things, in her opinion, were not cool. Fraser noted that the girl is actually modest, but it takes a long time to create artifacts of this level in such conditions. Unexpectedly, the main character expressed a desire to test all these things. Minnie was embarrassed again that all these items were not worth special attention. Fraser picked up one of the cannons, which turned out to be quite light. The girl immediately apologized that there was a flaw. The body of the weapon could not withstand the recoil of the shot. Adrian immediately remembered that he thought he was going to die when he tried to use this gun. Patrick's attention was attracted by another rather interesting object. It was a sword, but the main character had never seen anything like it. Minnie explained that this is a melodic blade. The main character picked up a melodic blade. He found this thing interesting. The girl said that this invention was also a failure. Fraser asked what the problem was. Minnie explained that she wanted to increase the strength and heat, so she attached a core to the sword for protection. In fact, it turned out that in order to withstand the desired force, the inventor needed more cores than expected. But if you make more connectors for cores, the balance will be upset. The girl complained that it would not be possible to use this thing simply as a sword, since its cutting properties did not even reach that of a kitchen knife. Fraser had his own plans for this failed melodic blade and offered to sell it to him. Minnie was outraged by this proposal. The girl said that she would not sell failed items, so if Patrick liked this blade so much, then let him take it for nothing. The main character explained that he was originally going to take the artifact as payment for a deal, but having seen the completeness of this sword, now he doesn't want to take it just like that. With these words, Fraser emptied the contents of his bag onto the table. Seeing such a number of cores, all those present could not contain their delight. Patrick, meanwhile, continued to admire the talent of the young inventor. He asked the girl not to stop experimenting now with the help of these nuclei. Due to her natural modesty, Minnie stated that she could not take so many cores. The girl persistently refused such generous payment. Minnie pushed the cannonballs away from her, but Patrick insisted on his own. At that moment, their hands touched, and a discharge resembling an electric one appeared. The young lady and the hunter froze in amazement. There was something unusual about this discharge. Fraser felt some incomprehensible process inside himself. Something was pouring into his head. Magic technology, perhaps. Patrick didn't notice that he was still touching the hands of the young inventor. But this did not hide from Adrian's gaze. Gate was indignant when he remarked to the main character that he was holding his girl's hands for too long, because she was still a child. Fraser, of course, is not an old man either, but the age difference was significant. The main character sharply withdrew his hands, justifying himself that this was not what they thought, and there was no need to accuse him of such terrible things. At that moment, that voice again sounded in Patrick's head, ordering him to kill and take away their power. Fraser automatically grabbed his head, as if trying to stop the flow of these terrible thoughts. The melodious blade fell out of the guy's hands, clanking on the floor. Minnie looked at what was happening in confusion, not knowing how it would be more correct to react. Raina broke the silence. She said that the guy overdid it a little and now he needs to rest. Patrick agreed. That's probably enough impressions for today. Raina joked that if Fraser couldn't sleep, she could sing a lullaby. The guy didn't appreciate the joke and refused. The leader of the orphanage was amused by all this, and the young inventor asked everyone not to act too adultly. Because of this, she felt humiliated. Already in the corridor, Raina offered to sing a lullaby to Adrian, but he refused with a cry. The moon was shining brightly in the sky. It was already past midnight. Time to sleep. But the main character had no time for sleep. It bothered him that the voice calling for murder appeared again. Although the guy heard that after some time after waking up, this problem should disappear. Patrick could not relax and not think about anything. He looked absent-mindedly at his hands, but there was something else in his head. The voice in my head only grew stronger. The young man did not understand what was happening. The image of Ryan appeared in my memory, and again this voice, forcing me to kill. Then a picture of the dying Crichton appeared before my eyes, and again a voice calling to kill metahumans. And also the image of a young inventor. The guy didn't understand that this happened today. The voice persistently ordered to kill and take away their powers. The main character was very stressed by all this. He was scared. Morning came, and the guy didn't get much sleep. People were visible through the lens of the binoculars. There were few of them, but they were all trained. Adrian said that the killer's base is located there. They were not far away, and the young man was worried whether everything would be okay. Patrick wondered if there was a metahuman among the killers. Adrian replied that their boss was a metahuman. The main character was interested in what abilities this boss had. Gate remembered that he barely saved himself when meeting that person, so he couldn't say for sure. But at the same time, the young man noticed that the leader of the killers was incredibly fast. In fact, Fraser did not offer the deal out of kindness or pity. This is necessary to test his abilities, and it is clear that there is no need to lower your vigilance. At some point, Adrian, leaving the observation post, reached into the desk drawer. Patrick asked what was there. Gates said that there is a sniper rifle that Minnie finished making yesterday, using electromagnetic energy in the barrel. This rifle fires cannonballs. The barrel is supposed to have almost zero noise and good fighting power. Adrian explained that Minnie could not bring this thing to fruition earlier due to a lack of cores. And now, thanks to Fraser's gift, the inventor has finally finished her work. Patrick hoped that the rifle would be useful. Seeing Fraser's doubts, Adrian said that he completely trusted Minnie. The main character assured that he also trusts this girl, so he hopes that the sword will do what it should. Gate wondered if Patrick was really going to use this sword, because even Minnie herself doubted its effectiveness. The main character took out the core, clarifying that the problem was in them. And now, having a good supply, he won't have to worry about it. Adrian was surprised. He had never seen such a small and pure core. Fraser said that among the developments of the city of Henderson, there is nuclear energy compression technology. Patrick placed the core in the compartment. The dimensions matched perfectly. The main character explained, provided that the cores can be compressed, even 10 pieces can be combined into one core. Gate was amazed. It turns out that there is so much in the city of Henderson. Fraser asked the young man if he had ever been to that city. The boy admitted that he had not been. He was born and raised in Detroit. The only thing he heard was that this place used to be a city too. Patrick wondered if Adrian remembered anything from that time. But the young man did not remember anything. At that time, he was too small. The main character said that in those days, this place was part of a huge city at that time with the same name, Detroit. Now there is almost nothing left here due to the demonic beasts. Previously, it was a huge city with a population of 10 million people. Adrian screamed with delight. If 10 million people lived here, then this city was even larger than the city of Henderson. Fraser sadly confirmed that these cities cannot even be compared. The boy closed his eyes dreamily, admitting that he would really like to live in the city someday. The main character suddenly remembered Ryan, who also really wanted to live in the city. He promised never to return to the desert again. Well, his wish came true. This memory made Patrick feel uneasy. The sword in Patrick's hand activated, filling the space around it with a pale blue light. Patrick was eager to use this sword. He was wondering how good this blade was. Looking at the bandits in the distance, he spontaneously expressed his thoughts out loud. A brick caught Fraser's eye. The guy had an idea. He threw the brick into the air and sharply slashed it with the blade of the blade, dividing it into 2 equal parts. Adrian was amazed that Minnie's creation really works. Now, having made sure that everything was working fine, Patrick said that they were done with the preparations. All that was left was to wait for the night. The main character woke up from Gates' voice that the time had already come. Fraser didn't even notice how he fell asleep. The previous sleepless night was making itself felt. Patrick thanked the young man for standing on guard. Now he was interested in what the bandits were doing. Adrian guessed that they were most likely already fast asleep. Only the guard on the tower was awake. Fraser outlined his plan. As soon as he approaches the entrance, Adrian will need to eliminate the guards in the towers. The young man assured that he could cope with this without any problems. In addition to the man on the tower itself, there were 4 more bandits on night duty. They were all armed. Hearing the rustling, one of the bandits raised a cry. Patrick reacted with lightning speed. He put a dagger to the bandit's throat, ordering him to be silent. The bandit's hand reached for the sword. This movement did not escape Fraser's attention, and he had to eliminate the bandit. The guard on the tower thought he heard something. He began to peer closely at the approximate source of the noise. Patrick quickly ducked around the corner to avoid getting hit by the flashlight. At some point, a flashlight beam snatched out of the darkness the lifeless body of a comrade lying on the ground. The guard sounded the alarm, loudly calling for help. Fraser carefully watched the bandits from around the corner. The guard searched the windows with a beam, trying to wake up the others, but they were fast asleep. The boss woke up from the screams and noise. The big guy went out into the yard and in a dissatisfied voice asked what was going on. Another bandit standing alone at his post came into Patrick's field of vision. The main character easily eliminated this obstacle. Standing over the body of the murdered bandit, Fraser wondered for a second whether it had always been so easy for a metahuman to kill someone without powers. Although Fraser had not killed a person for the first time, he still did not want to get used to this feeling. Pranya's soul was not easy. The memories were still too fresh. At some point, the main character felt that someone was watching him. He carefully looked out from behind the wall and noticed a man standing calmly in the corridor. It was a young man with a tattoo on his face. He was looking towards Fraser with a grin. This bandit seemed very strange to the main character. He did not even feel his presence. Patrick drew his sword and prepared to attack, but the bandit suddenly disappeared from sight. He was very fast. A second later, the big man was already next to Fraser, trying to attack. The bandit moved so fast that it was impossible to follow. He deftly lunged with his foot, and Patrick lost his balance. The main character did not have time to get up when the boss of the killers pressed him to the ground with his knee, wondering who he was. The bandit was also interested in where Fraser came from. The big guy held his night guest tightly, not allowing him to even move. Suddenly, the bandit boss noticed something. He looked closely at Patrick. The floor under the guest cracked, which was not the case under the body of the comrade lying next to him. This meant something to the bandit. Therefore, the boss immediately asked the guest a direct question. Is he a metahuman? Fraser did not answer this question. He stood in a stance, expecting an attack. This aroused particular interest in the bandit, and he suggested leaving the room outside, since it was too crowded for a fight. The main character was a little alarmed. It was one thing to fight with a beast, but here he was a metahuman like himself. The next moment, Patrick was abruptly thrown through the window. Again, he did not have time to react. The main character landed with his back directly on the roof of the car. It looks like he's going to have a hard time with the assassin boss. Adrian held his boss at gunpoint, not daring to shoot yet. Fraser stood up, and overcoming the noise in his head, sat down. With such an opponent, he will need special tactics. The main character looked up and saw that his opponent was about to attack him again. A second later, the bandit struck, throwing Patrick from the car. Other bandits were already rushing to help the boss, although there was no need for this. The main bandit abruptly stopped his comrades, declaring that the guest was his prey. Fraser was no longer himself with rage. He was going to try the melodic blade. The bandit suspected something when he noticed a blue glow enveloping his enemy. Adrian still held the bandit at gunpoint as best he could. Suddenly, the big guy's gaze shifted to something else. His attention was attracted by a light in the destroyed house opposite. The bandit moved with incredible speed, covering the distance to the light source. Gate couldn't keep the big guy at gunpoint. He was too fast. The boss did not personally bother with this minor problem in his opinion. Therefore, he instructed his comrades to get rid of the sniper in the building on the west. The bandits set off, now themselves under the gun of a young sniper. For Adrian, the task became more complicated. Getting rid of 4 at once was not easy. The young man pointed his gun at one of the bandits. You will have to get rid of them one by one and very quickly. The bandits have almost reached the place they need. One of them ordered to kill the sniper immediately. Meanwhile, Fraser again stood in a combat position, awaiting another attack. The bandit didn't have to wait long, another second, and he would attack again. If Patrick was terribly angry at the speed of his opponent, then the bandit, on the contrary, was irritated by the excessive slowness of the night guest. The bandit caught the eye of a tire lying on the ground. Without thinking twice, he threw it at his opponent. Another moment, and the tire would have hit Fraser on the head. The killer boss grinned, anticipating another small victory. The main character needed to react quickly. Moreover, the tire did not fly as fast as its rival. Patrick swung his sword, and the tire broke into 2 pieces. But there was also a bandit very close by, and it was not so easy to deal with him. The big guy did a sharp somersault and knocked the sword out of Fraser's hands. The bandit, grinning, told his rival that he could not properly use his power. Patrick was incredibly angry. He felt for his sword with his other hand. The bandit continued to gloat, noting that his rival had awakened only recently. Patrick looked at him silently. During the entire fight, the main character did not say a word to his opponent in response. Meanwhile, the guest interested the bandit in another way, and he decided to invite his rival to join their gang. And as a bonus, the boss would teach him how to fight properly. Patrick, calling a spade, corrected the boss of the killers. He didn't just mean to join, but to rob the desert with him. The main character sarcastically apologized for the refusal, citing the fact that the voices in his head had become very noisy and were ordering him to kill the enemy right now. Licking his lips, the bandit smiled sarcastically, saying that in this case, he was sorry, and the guest was destined to become the main dish of today's dinner. The rivals rushed to attack at the same time. Other bandits were already running into the building, intending to kill Adrian. With spears at the ready, they climbed the stairs, trying to figure out the place they needed. One more step, and the bandits are on the floor they need. Gate stood on the edge of the building. The first scream was heard behind him. The boy grinned maliciously. He had rope devices in his hands. Looking at the screams from behind, the young man said that he tried very hard, setting all these traps, so let them activate them all. Gathering all his strength, Patrick looked intently at his opponent. He had to defeat this bandit. A second later, the bandit attacked again, without even straining, while Fraser was trying with effort to develop the speed he needed. The bandit stopped again, as if mockingly allowing his opponent to catch his breath. Patrick mentally repeated like a mantra that he needed to calm down, because his opponent was much more experienced in battle than he was. On top of that, Fraser has very little experience in battles with metahumans. Although the main one has fought many times with very strong demonic beasts, humans are a completely different matter. And then the main character comes up with an idea. What if he forgets that there is a person in front of him? Patrick decided to try a different tactic. He will treat his opponent as a demonic beast in human form and calmly analyze his behavior. All Fraser needed was to set aside his preconceptions about how people behave. Before him was a real beast, insidious and resourceful. While the main character was trying out a different strategy, the young sniper was waiting for the bandits, hiding on the roof with a gun aimed at the right place. The exit to the roof was tightly sealed and tied with ropes just in case. Adrian gloated. Let the bandits knock as much as they want. The door still won't open. He kept his finger on the trigger, ready to react at any moment. Now Gate was not worried about stupid bandits, but about their boss, for whom he prepared a bullet. But the subject the young man needed was nowhere to be seen. Adrian was already losing patience. He quietly muttered to Patrick not to stand there like a pillar, but to lure this boss out. The boss liked to use surprise tactics, and now he suddenly appeared again. The bandit, as always, jumped up to Patrick with lightning speed to deliver a couple of blows and disappear from sight again. It seemed that this big guy never gets tired, despite the speed with which he moves. And now he easily struck, while continuing to smile. The main character identified the characteristic features of the man-beast. This is speed and strong kicks. The bandit's legs were long and quite muscular, but is it only his legs that are strong? That was the main question. Fraser decided to experiment a little with this man-beast. The guy decided to try to close the distance between them and see how the bandit behaved. At close range, the bandit mostly dodged. Without having time to defend himself, the main character receives another blow, this time even stronger. Perhaps this strategy turned out to be wrong. The bandit takes nothing. The boss still didn't have a single scratch. While the main character seemed to have been in a great battle, the guy had a hard time breathing. The boss's blow hit a painful spot. Patrick lay on the ground, not having the strength to get up. The boss at this time decided to finish with his opponent. He intended to strike the main character with a powerful knee blow and finish everything with an overhead kick. The bandit was approaching his opponent with speed. Another moment, and it will be over. At that moment, shots rang out. The bullets flew one after another, but the bandit deftly dodged. He further increased his speed by varying between cars. Adrian tried to hit the bandit, but it was not easy to aim at a target moving at great speed. The boss was hiding like a mouse. But one bullet still reached its target, wounding the bandit in the side. The boss was angry with the young sniper. The whole problem was that the bandit missed the percussion, and his strength was not enough, especially since he did not expect it to be such a night. Gate did not stop shooting at every target, but so far to no avail. The bandit still managed to dodge. Having fixed his gaze on the place where the bullets were flying, the boss decided to change his decision to start with the main dish and be content with a small snack for now. The bandit's target was now the young sniper on the roof. Adrian was scared. He did not expect such a turn of events. Now the main task was not to let this monster get close to you. The bandit was rapidly approaching the house where the sniper was holed up. Overcoming several tens of meters was not a problem for such a fast man-beast. The young shooter began to become noticeably nervous. His hands were shaking. On top of everything else, another problem loomed. The energy of the core in the cannon was already running out. By this time, the bandit had already covered the distance separating him from the snack. He deftly jumped onto the ledge on the house, looking down at the sniper. Adrian continued to shoot, hoping only for a miracle. Another moment, and the boss was already at roof level. Another second, and the beast will overtake its victim. Gate was in a state of horror. He did not expect that the monster man would jump so high. The monster in human form finally reached the roof and was ready to grab its own. Sacrifice. Adrian took aim at him and almost pulled the trigger. But at this moment, a kick knocks the weapon out of the young man's hands. The monster grinned, anticipating how he would eat this young man. With courage that came from nowhere, Adrian hit the monster with the remains of his cannon. The monster tried to dodge again. Fortunately, the guy also had a crossbow with him. The monster was at gunpoint again. The boss stopped right opposite to take a breath and at the same time decide how best to achieve his goal. The bandit glared at the young man, also trying to psychologically suppress his will. Adrian did not take his eyes off the man-beast. The young man chose the moment when it was better to shoot. Suddenly, the bandit decided to start a conversation with his victim. The big guy asked if the young man was from Detroit. The wound inflicted on the bandit continued to bleed, but the monster felt almost no pain. Now his thoughts were occupied with something else. At this moment, Gate decides to finally release the arrow and finish off the monster standing in front of him. Unfortunately, due to trembling in my hands and panic, the arrow did not hit the target. The bandit calmly followed the flight of the arrow a few centimeters from his head. Adrian urgently needed to fire another arrow before the bandit attacked, but at the most crucial moment the crossbow jammed. Seeing the young man's confusion, the bandit slowly took a step forward. Adrian was terrified. He shouted to the bandit so that he should not dare to approach him. The monster gloated that the sniper could not hit his target. The young man feverishly tried to insert an arrow into the slot of the crossbow, but his trembling hands did not want to obey. The man-beast slowly approached close to Adrian. The monster looked into the eyes of the frightened young man with a grin, calling him a snack. Gate was still trying to insert the arrow into the crossbow. With shaking hands, he pulled the bolt, but nothing worked. The boss laughed in the young man's eyes, daring him to shoot. He was sure that the sniper could not be saved, and now he was simply enjoying the moment. Poor Gate has almost resigned himself to his fate. He has already prepared to meet his death. There was no longer any hope for the crossbow, and the guy was simply moving something chaotically on the weapon that had let him down. A shot rang out, and the arrow still flew out of the crossbow, but the monster managed to intercept it right before his eyes. Adrian couldn't believe his eyes. He refused to understand what was happening. In front of him was not a person, but something unknown to science. The boss easily broke the caught arrow with 2 fingers, saying that such toys are powerless against him. After such words, the young man's fear gave way to rage. Adrian hit the monster with all his might, but he dodged again. The monster was glad that the young man opened up. Now the boss stood behind his victim, smiling sarcastically. The bandit, calling the poor fellow a snack, threw him to the floor and pressed him tightly with his hands so that he would not move. Gate screamed as loud as he could, demanding to let him go, but the screams had no effect on the monster. With his hand, the monster felt for the broken arrow he had thrown before. The man-beast used this arrow as a knife, plunging it into the body of the unfortunate young man. The poor fellow screamed in pain, but the monster continued his terrible work. The bandit at that moment lost the remnants of the humanity that was still in him. The monster said that he liked screaming, because a good dinner would not be complete without pleasant music.